If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today we are looking at the case of Jeffrey R. MacDonald. This is one of the most litigated murder cases in American criminal history, but I have to say, I hadn't really looked into it that deeply until now. So we will be taking a look at this case where he was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife and two daughters in February 1970 while serving as an Army Special Forces physician. So quite a lot of wrinkles in this case. This case was actually requested by a very, very astute Mindshock listener, so I put it to the top of the pile, and we'll be taking a look at it in typical Mindshock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront, upturning every stone and theory in this case. As always, if you want to help support the Mindshock podcast, help keep up awareness in unsolved cases, missing persons cases, wrongful convictions, and any and all cases where justice may not have been served, and to verify that it has, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support Mindshock that way. Like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel. If you're not getting notifications, just like and comment more. All right, so let's go over the overview. I don't know how quick it's going to be because there's a lot of information here, but let's look at the official narrative, so to speak, on the wiki, and then we will do the deep dive into every aspect of this case. Jeffrey Robert MacDonald, born October 12, 1943, is an American former medical doctor and United States Army captain who was convicted in August 79 of murdering his pregnant wife and two daughters in February 1970 while serving as an Army Special Forces physician. MacDonald has always proclaimed his innocence of the murders, which he claims were committed by 4 intruders, 3 male, 1 female, very specific, who had entered the unlocked rear door of his apartment at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and attacked him, his wife, and his children with instruments such as knives, clubs, and ice picks. See, already we're off to a start here with a lot of specificity. How often, either in false or true cases, are multiple perpetrators said to be using ice picks? Knives, clubs, okay, but ice picks? How often do people use ice picks to carry out attacks on families? I mean, this is dark stuff, if true. And the other thing, I'm going to just mention it right now. So this guy's a military officer. So not just any, I mean, he's a captain. So clearly he has some kind of level of discipline, physical and mental. So coercing a false confession out of an individual such as this, it might be difficult. So we do have to keep that in mind. Okay, let's continue here. Prosecutors and appellate courts have pointed to strong physical evidence attesting to his guilt. He is currently incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. The MacDonald murder case remains one of the most litigated murder cases in American criminal history. Early life. Jeffrey MacDonald was born in Jamaica, Queens, New York, the second of 3 children born to Robert and Dorothy MacDonald. He was raised in a poor household on Long Island with a disciplinarian father who, although nonviolent towards his wife and children, demanded obedience and achievement from his family. MacDonald attended Patchogue Medford High School, where he became president of the student council. He was voted both most popular and most likely to succeed by his fellow students, and was king of the senior prom. So he got quite the overachiever here. Toward the end of his 8th grade year, MacDonald became acquainted with Colette Catherine Stevenson. He would later recollect he first observed Colette walking down the hallway with her best friend, and that although he was attracted to both girls, he found Colette more attractive. Approximately 2 weeks later, they began talking and formed a friendship, with MacDonald soon asking her out to the movies. The two formed a brief romantic relationship in the 9th grade, with MacDonald later recollecting that they fell in love while holding hands on a balcony while watching the movie A Summer Place at the Rialto Theater in Patchogue. He would later reminisce that whenever he or Colette heard the song Theme from A Summer Place across the airwaves, either of us would turn up the radio. The following summer, while visiting a friend on Fire Island, Colette announced to MacDonald their relationship was over. MacDonald later formed a relationship with a girl named Penny Wells. Scholarship and marriage. MacDonald's high school grades were sufficient for him to earn a 3-year scholarship at Princeton University, where he enrolled as a pre-med student in 1962. By the second year of his studies, MacDonald and Wells had separated. He soon resumed his romantic relationship with Colette, then a freshman, at Skidmore College in Sarasota Springs. He would later recollect Colette had grown into a shy young woman with a slight fear of the world in general, who would rely on his own self-confidence. MacDonald found her timidity touching and gradually viewed himself as her protector in addition to her boyfriend. You know what's curious? The thing that jumps out at me here, so Colette had grown into a shy young woman. Also, was she not so... So she was 1 year younger than him, roughly, maybe. So she was not in the same class, or was she? So was she kind of popular and outgoing in high school? And then if she had grown into a timid, shy young woman, what caused that? Because if it wasn't him, was it another boyfriend? Like, what? There has to be a reason for that. That just doesn't magically happen overnight. So that is curious there. So that's something to keep in mind as we go ahead here. The two regularly exchanged letters, and he would frequently hitchhike to Skidmore College to be in her company at weekends. Although MacDonald was dating other women at the time, he resolved to marry Colette upon learning she was pregnant with his child in August 1963. She, in turn, left college to raise their child. With the consent of Colette's family, the two married September 14th in New York City. 100 people attended the service, with the reception held at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. The couple then honeymooned at Cape Cod. Their first daughter, Kimberley Catherine, was born April 18th, 1964. Medical school. Upon completion of his undergrad degree at Princeton, MacDonald briefly worked as a construction supervisor before he moved with his wife and child to Chicago in the summer of 1965, where he had been accepted at Northwestern University Medical School. The couple moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, with Colette committed to maintaining the household and raising their daughter, as MacDonald focused on his studies while also working a series of part-time jobs to assist with the family financing. The following year, the family relocated to a middle-class neighborhood. Their second child, Kristen Jean, was born on May 8th, 1967. Shortly after MacDonald graduated from med school in 1968, he and his family relocated to Bergenfield, New Jersey, as he completed a 1-year internship at the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York, specializing in thoracic surgery. MacDonald later described his internship year as a horrendous year for both himself and Colette, adding he frequently worked 36 hours with only 12 hours at home. Consequently, when at home, he was frequently exhausted and had limited interaction with his wife and daughters. At the completion of his internship, MacDonald and Colette vacationed in Aruba before MacDonald joined the Army. U.S. Army. MacDonald was commissioned in the U.S. Army June 28, 1969, and sent to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, to undergo a 6-week physician's basic training course. While at Fort Sam Houston, he volunteered to be assigned to the Army's Special Forces, the Green Berets, to become a Special Forces physician. He was then assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he completed their paratrooper training course. Although MacDonald had joined the Army knowing he might be deployed to serve in the Vietnam War, he later learned that as a Green Beret doctor, he was unlikely to serve overseas. And again, we're not going to go down Mindshock land right now. However, it is curious whether or not MacDonald could have been part of some kind of MK Ultra precursor. or something of that nature, or the precursor to the Phoenix program, where supposedly Jeffrey Dahmer and other serial killers may have been connected to in some fashion and have been brainwashed or mind control experiments conducted upon them, at which point they may have been compelled to snap or kill, either by the design of their string pullers or just some kind of psychic break with reality that caused them to lash out. So we will, of course, examine that theory as well, but that just jumped out at me since we're, again, dealing with some kind of military overlap here. Fort Bragg. In late August, MacDonald reported to the 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to serve as the group's surgeon. He was joined by his wife and children, and the MacDonald family resided at 554 Castle Drive, in a section of the base reserved for married officers and afforded security by military police. The couple quickly became popular among their neighbors, although MacDonald and Colette are known to have argued occasionally. That's actually a curious point there, because in a lot of these accounts, they're either never argue, they're the perfect family, the picture perfect, or they argued a lot and they were troubled. Here we have an account where there's occasional arguing, which some would deem in a perfectly average category. By the time the MacDonalds moved into their new apartment at Fort Bragg, Colette had accrued 2 years of studies with aspirations to obtain a bachelor's degree in English literature and teach part-time. Both daughters had developed distinctive personalities, Kimberley being marked feminine, intelligent, and shy, Kristen a boisterous tomboy who would run over and crack someone if she observed her older sister being bullied by other children. So here's the younger sister is the boisterous tomboy who would stand up for her older sister. Another curiosity, something you don't see all the time. On December 10th, the 3rd Special Forces Group was deactivated and MacDonald was transferred on base to headquarters and headquarters company 6th Special Forces Group, 1st Special Forces, to serve as a preventative medical officer. Shortly before Christmas '69, with his wife approximately 3 months pregnant with their 3rd child and 1st son, MacDonald brought his daughters a Shetland pony, anticipating the family would soon relocate to a farm in Connecticut. I mean, these people get around. He kept this purchase a secret from his wife and children, and he and his stepfather-in-law drove them to the stable as a surprise on Christmas Day. His daughters chose to name the pony Trooper. The same month, Colette is known to have penned a letter to college acquaintances in which she described her life as, quote, never being so normal or happy, end quote. Adding she and her husband were content and their baby son was due to be born in July and her family would be complete. By 1970, MacDonald had earned the rank of captain. He was planning to study advanced medical training at Yale University upon completion of his tour of duty as a Green Beret doctor. Yale, huh? Shades of Skull and Bones coming up. I mean, again, I'm not anticipating any kind of crazy mind shocks in this particular case, but just from doing all of these cases, there seem to be certain patterns here that are not present in the majority of cases. So just that's just another curiosity. We'll see if that pans out or not. No bias here. February 16th to 17th, 1970. On the afternoon of February 16th, MacDonald took his daughters to feed and ride the Christmas pony he had bought with them. The trio then returned home at about 5:45 p.m. MacDonald then showered and changed into an old pair of blue pajamas. After the family ate supper, Colette left the household to attend an evening teaching class at Fort Bragg's North Carolina University Extension. According to MacDonald, he then played horsey, allowing his daughters to ride upon his back as if he was their Shetland pony for a short while before he had put Kristen to bed at approximately 7 p.m. as Kimberley played a game on the coffee table. He then slept for an hour before watching Kimberley's favorite television show, Laugh-In, with her before his older daughter also went to bed. Colette herself returned home at 9:40 p.m. The two had sat on the couch watching television together before Colette decided to go to bed midway through The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. MacDonald had himself fallen asleep in the living room in the early hours of the following day. Murders. 3:42 a.m., February 17th, 1970. Dispatchers at Fort Bragg received an emergency phone call from MacDonald, who faintly spoke into the receiver, quote, help, 544 Castle Drive stabbing. 544 Castle Drive stabbing, Hurry, end quote. The operator then heard the sound of the receiver clatter against a wall or floor. Within 10 minutes, responding military police had arrived at the address, initially believing they were responding to a domestic disturbance. They found the front door closed and locked and the house dark inside. When no one answered the door, they circled to the back of the house where a police sergeant discovered the back screen door closed and unlocked and the back door wide open. Upon entering, the sergeant walked into the master bedroom before running to the front of the house, shouting, "Tell them to get Womack ASAP." Colette MacDonald was discovered sprawled on the floor of the master bedroom. She lay on her back with one eye open and one breast exposed. She had been repeatedly clubbed around her body, with both her forearms later found to be broken. The pathologist would note that these wounds had likely been inflicted as Colette had raised her arms to protect her face. In addition, she had been stabbed 21 times in the chest with an ice pick and 16 times about the neck and chest with a knife, with her trachea severed in 2 places. A bloodied and torn pajama top was draped upon her chest, and a paring knife lay beside her body. Beside her, Jeffrey MacDonald was found lying face down, alive but wounded, with his head on Colette's chest and one arm around her neck. As military personnel approached, he whispered, "Check my kids. I heard my kids crying." 5-year-old Kimberley was found in her bed, having been repeatedly bludgeoned about the head and body and stabbed in the neck with a knife between 8 and 10 times. She lay on her side. Her skull had been fractured from at least 2 blows to the right side of her head, and one wound to her face had caused her cheekbone to protrude through her skin. The wounds inflicted to Kimberly's head were sufficiently severe in nature to have caused bruising to her brain, coma, and death soon after infliction. Across the hallway, 2-year-old Kristen was found in her own bed, also lying on her left side with a baby bottle close to her mouth. She had been stabbed 33 times across the chest, neck, hands, and back with a knife, and 15 times with an ice pick. I mean, this is insane. I don't know if I've ever heard of a case where there was this level of damage inflicted on children this young. 2 knife wounds had penetrated her heart, and the ice pick wounds were noted to be shallow. The injuries to her hands were likely defense wounds. On the headboard of the MacDonald's marital bed, the word PIG was written in 8-inch capital letters. The blood used to write the word was later determined to belong to Colette. Having received impromptu resuscitation, MacDonald sat upright, then exclaimed, "Jesus Christ, look at my wife. I'm gonna kill those goddamn acid heads." End quote. He was immediately taken to nearby Womack Hospital, shouting, "Let me see my kids," as he was carried out of his home on a stretcher. MacDonald's account. Taken to Womack Army Medical Center, medical staff discovered the wounds MacDonald had suffered were much less numerous and severe than those inflicted upon his wife and children. He had suffered cuts, bruises, and fingernail scratches to his face and chest, although none of these wounds were life-threatening or required stitching. I mean, I'm just going through this again. We'll see if they actually took the DNA from underneath his fingernails to see what was there. MacDonald was also found to have a mild concussion. He had also received a single stab wound between 2 ribs on his right torso. The wound was described by a staff surgeon as a clean, small, sharp incision measuring 5/8 of an inch deep, and had caused his lung to partially collapse. MacDonald was released from the hospital after 9 days. Questioned by the Criminal Investigation Division, MacDonald claimed that at about 2 a.m. February 17th, he had washed the evening's dinner's dishes before deciding to go to bed. That's 2 a.m. What's his usual bedtime? Although because his younger daughter, Kristen, had wet his side of the bed, he had taken her to her own bed. Not wishing to wake his wife to change the sheets, he had then taken a blanket from Kristen's room and fallen asleep on the living room couch. So already this is a problem because unless this is usual, or is this the only time he ever did that? Is this the only time he slept on the living room couch? Or was this bedwetting repeated and he normally did this? According to MacDonald, he was later awakened by Colette and Kimberly's screams and Colette shouting, Jeff, help, why are they doing this to me?" As he rose from the couch to go to their aid, he was attacked by 3 male intruders, 1 black, 2 white. The shorter of the 2 white men had worn lightweight, possibly surgical gloves. A 4th intruder he described as a white female with long blonde hair, possibly a wig, and wearing high-heeled knee-high boots and a white floppy hat partially covering her face. I mean, this is kind of ludicrous. I mean, this is quite, if he just made all this up, I mean, this is kind of weird. Who's going to go on a killing spree wearing heels? Wearing high, I mean, I don't know. This individual stood nearby holding a lighted candle chanting, quote, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs," end quote. MacDonald claimed that the 3 males attacked him with a club and ice pick, with the female intruders shouting, "Hit him again." During the struggle, his pajama top was pulled over his head to his wrists, and he had used this bound garment to ward off thrusts from the ice pick, although eventually he was overcome by his assailants and knocked unconscious in the living room end of the hallway leading to the bedrooms. When he had regained consciousness, the intruders had left the house. He then stumbled from room to room, attempting mouth-to-mouth resuscitation upon each of his daughters to no avail, before discovering his wife. He had pulled a small paring knife from Colette's chest, which he then tossed to the floor, attempted in vain to find her pulse, then draped his pajama jacket over her body. Then he had phoned for help. Initial investigation. And of course, everybody knows what I'm going to say. Brain fingerprint scan for MacDonald, and of course, all the security on the base as well. Initial investigation. Within minutes of the discoveries at Castle Drive, military police were instructed to check the occupants of all vehicles in and around Fort Bragg, seeking 2 white men, 1 black man, and a white woman with blonde hair and a floppy hat in an effort to apprehend the 4 intruders MacDonald alleged had attacked him and his family. Despite these efforts, military police failed to locate the 4 intruders, and the initiative was abandoned by 6 a.m. Here's the other thing, too. If you're gonna make up attackers, would you use the vague, oh, there were 3 of them or 4 of them, average height, average build, all white or all black, whatever. This guy, if he's lying, I mean, he selected a high-heeled blonde woman, possibly a blonde wig with a floppy hat, a short white guy, a tall white guy, and a black guy. So it's like he's trying to cover as many bases as possible, but this group might stand out, whereas if he had just said there were 3 or 4 nondescript type individuals, I don't know. This is a tough one. Shortly after daylight on February 17th, investigators recovered the murder weapons just outside the back door. These instruments were an old hickory kitchen knife, an ice pick, and a 31-inch long piece of lumber with 2 blue threads attached with blood. All 3 were quickly determined to have come from the MacDonald house, and all had been wiped clean of fingerprints. MacDonald later claimed to have never seen these items before. So if they were really from the house, he claimed to have never seen them before. I mean, how much shock is he in? And also, if he thinks he's going to be railroaded. I mean, again, this is before most of these true crime TV shows, so we're not talking 3 or 4D chess here. So this many decades ago, in a simpler time, would he just deny seeing them just as an instinctually if he felt he was going to go down for this? I mean, I don't know. This is kind of weird. Scrutiny. As Army investigators studied the physical evidence, the Army CID quickly became disbelieving of MacDonald's account as they found very little evidence to support his version of events. Although MacDonald was trained in unarmed combat, the living room where he had supposedly fought for his life against 3 armed assailants showed few signs of a struggle, apart from a coffee table that had been knocked onto its side with a pile of magazines beneath the edge and a flower plant that had fallen to the floor. That's curious as well, because if these really are acid-tripping psychotics, I mean, would we think there'd be way more of a mess? I mean, I don't know. Questioning of the MacDonald's neighbors revealed they had heard no sounds of a struggle or disturbance within the household in the early hours, but had heard Colette shouting in a loud and angry voice. The 16-year-old daughter of these neighbors, who occasionally babysat for the family, informed investigators the 2 had seemed taciturn and indifferent to each other in the month prior to the murders. By February 23rd, Colonel Robert Kriwanek, the Fort Bragg provost marshal, had advised the FBI to discontinue their search for the four intruders. Okay, so yeah, this actually reminds me of the Ketty Cabin murder case. If you haven't checked that out on Mindshock, make sure you check that out as well. Just from all those cabins were so close together, supposedly nobody heard anything. But okay, so initially, first impression of the case here, either he's lying or he's telling the truth, but he had some kind of psychotic break, either due to some kind of MK Ultra type experimentation or not, or he just possibly genetic, whatever. We don't know his history with mental health or his family's history. Or there's some kind of cover-up. If he was involved in something top secret and he's set up, obviously the neighbors could be intimidated into saying whatever. And if the Fort Bragg provost marshal is in on it, then of course it could look this way. So what am I missing? Or it happened exactly like he said, but for whatever reason, if people had something against him, perhaps they had no interest in really finding these people. Or I guess the final option is that just incompetence and they just didn't believe him for whatever reason, even if he was telling the truth and even if those individuals were out there. But again, for people who lived at the base at the time, one would think security might be tight. Was security just not that tight where just random roving acid-tripping psychotics could easily get into homes? Or was security tight? Because this is very, very important here, because that would answer a lot of questions here. But let's continue here. In addition to the lack of damage to the inside of the house, no fibers from MacDonald's torn pajama top were found in the living room where he claimed the garment had been when torn in his struggle with the intruders. However, fibers from the pajama top were found beneath Colette's body and in the bedrooms of both his daughters, and one fiber from the garment was also found under Kristen's fingernail. A single fragment of skin was recovered from beneath one of Colette's fingernails, although this evidence was later lost. Okay, this is not good. I mean, obviously incompetence could take place whether this is or isn't a setup, whether he is innocent or he's guilty. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's a problem when evidence is lost. So if this fragment of skin that was under Colette's fingernails, see, if this is some kind of frame-up job, even if it wasn't intended as a frame-up on the outset, like if he pissed people off, and then this really happened, and they decide, okay, we're going to make him go down for this, even if they weren't involved in the planning of this before the fact, they just took advantage of a situation of roving acid-tripping psychotics, or maybe it was planned and they were hired, who knows, but would they make that piece of evidence go missing? Because if that DNA does not match him, I mean, what does that mean? And it's conveniently lost? I mean, that's a problem. Again, regardless of innocence or guilt, that's a problem. Bloodstain splinters likely sourcing from the section of lumber recovered close to the back door of the apartment were recovered from all three bedrooms of the apartment, but not the room where MacDonald claimed to have been attacked. Also, how smart is this guy? So this guy supposedly is really smart. So would he be that sloppy with his story of the cover-up? Maybe, if he's in a state of shock and all this, even if he is guilty. Or if he's innocent, he might have got the story wrong too, depending on his state of shock and how severe his injuries are, and blood loss, etc. So yeah, it's hard to make heads or tails out of any of this. No blood or fingerprints were found on either telephone MacDonald claimed he had used to call for help after checking each member of his family and attempting to resuscitate them. Furthermore, the bloodstained tip of a surgical glove was also found beneath the headboard where the blood inscription was written. This glove was identical in composition to a medical supply MacDonald invariably kept in the family kitchen. I mean, that's a curiosity as well. So that doesn't mean it's the same type of glove, but if it is, would acid-tripping psychotics rely on using gloves within the home instead of bringing their own? I mean, maybe. I mean, again, if they're tripping, then they see the gloves and like, oh, maybe it's a good idea to wear gloves not to leave fingerprints. I mean, who knows? If we're dealing with acid-tripping psychotics, I mean, all logic goes out the window. So in terms of determining motivations at that point. Although it had rained on the night of February 16th to 17th, and MacDonald also specifically claimed the female intruder's boots were all wet, with rainwater just dripping off of them. The sole footprint observed at the scene was a bloody bare footprint located in Kristen's bedroom, leading from the child's bed in the direction of the doorway. And it doesn't say it here whether that footprint exactly matches MacDonald. But whether it does or doesn't, is it really possible for 4 acid-tripping psychotics to not leave any footprints from wet shoes? Unless they were left and this was all covered up. I mean, are there photographs immediately after? Forensic analysis. By mid-March, the CID had obtained the results of forensic testing of the blood, hair, and fiber samples within 544 Castle Drive that contradicted MacDonald's accounts of his movements and further convinced investigators of his guilt. For example, Kimberly's blood was also found on his pajama top, even though MacDonald had claimed he was not wearing this garment while in her room attempting resuscitation. MacDonald's own blood was located in significant quantities in only 2 locations: in front of the kitchen cabinet containing the rubber gloves and upon the right side of a hallway bathroom sink. Investigators also questioned why Colette's blood was found in Kristen's room, although all 3 victims were found in separate rooms, suggesting that they had been attacked separately. Moreover, although blood evidence indicated Kimberly had been attacked as she entered the master bedroom, investigators questioned why home intruders would bother to carry her back to her bedroom to continue their attack. The 4 members of the MacDonald family had different blood types, a statistical anomaly that assisted investigators in determining the movements of each member of the household and their subsequent theory as to a likely scenario of the unfolding events. Upon the assumption the 4 individuals discovered by responding military police were the only 4 people in the house in the early hours of February 17th, investigators were able to reconstruct a likely scenario of the chain of events that had unfolded via blood typing and the nature and severity of the wounds discovered on each individual. Okay, so if there is guilt, though, could this be a situation where if Colette snapped and possibly attacked 1 or 2 of the kids and MacDonald retaliated? I mean, we really don't know. Is this as simple as he snapped, he killed everybody one at a time? Or did Colette snap and was she involved in hurting 1 or more of the kids? I mean, just the severity of the injuries is a huge problem. I mean, this is really weird. And if there was, the fact that a female intruder was reported, why would he include that? Because this is also, I mean, this is so long ago, a little bit more of a traditional time. Because statistically, female killers are way more sadistic than male killers. So females are far less likely to be sadistic serial killers. But the ones that are extremely, extremely sadistic and extremely more violent with far more repeated blows with knives or whatever weapons than their male serial killer counterparts. So if he's telling the truth, and if the female was the one that killed the children and his wife, that kind of matches the injuries if we're looking only at statistics of female versus male killers. Again, that doesn't mean that's what happened here, but I find it curious that he included a female as one of the intruders. I mean, that is interesting. So did he just pull that out of the ether, not to mention just this motley crew of killers, different shape, sizes, and colors, including the female? And why would he include the detail of it might be a wig? I mean, it's just, it's a little weird. It's weird to me. This story is definitely weird to me, unless, does he have a history of drug use or some kind of, again, if he was experimented on mentally and he was hallucinating, he could be telling what he believes to be the truth, even if it's not. But again, I find it curious, because if he hadn't reported that one of them was a female, I would find that less curious in terms of matching up to the injuries on everybody. I mean, yeah, this is really, really tough. Forensic reconstruction. An argument or fight between MacDonald and Colette began in the master bedroom, possibly over the issue of Kristen's repeatedly wetting his side of the bed while sleeping there, or his adultery. Investigators speculated that the argument turned physical and she had probably hit him in the forehead with a hairbrush, which resulted in a mark on his forehead which failed to break his skin. As he retaliated by hitting her, first with his fists, then beating her with a piece of lumber. Kimberley, whose blood and brain serum were found in the doorway, may have walked in after hearing the commotion and was struck at least once on the head, possibly by accident. Believing Colette dead, MacDonald carried the mortally wounded Kimberley back to her room. After stabbing her, MacDonald then... See, this is kind of weird. Even if that happened, there's a very big jump from accidentally hitting your kid to stabbing them dozens and dozens of times. I mean, that's weird. MacDonald then proceeded to Kristen's room carrying the club he had used to bludgeon Kimberley, intent on disposing of the last remaining potential witness. Before he could do so, Colette, whose blood was found on Kristen's bed covers and on one wall of her room, apparently regained consciousness, stumbling into her younger daughter's bedroom and threw her own body over Kristen in a desperate effort to protect her. After killing both of them, MacDonald then wrapped Colette's body in a sheet and carried her body to the master bedroom, leaving a smudged footprint matching her blood type as he exited Kristen's bedroom. CID investigators then theorized that MacDonald attempted to cover up the murders using articles on the Manson family murders that he had recently read in the March 1970 issue of Esquire investigators had found in the living room. Well, that is a damning piece of circumstantial evidence, is it not? Yeah, that's not nothing. Obviously, that's not anywhere near beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, it's a popular magazine. It's not like it's an obscure magazine that might tell you how to murder people. It's Esquire. So, a lot of people had that magazine in their living room. So that doesn't really mean anything. However, if he hadn't had the magazine there at all, it's harder to make that connection. Also, though, would he have gotten rid of that magazine at some point? I mean, I don't know, to be less suspicious if he is guilty. Putting on surgical gloves from a medical supply in the kitchen closet, he went to the master bedroom where he used Colette's blood to write the word PIG on the headboard. MacDonald then laid his torn pajama top over her dead body and repeatedly stabbed her in the chest with an ice pick. Then discarded the weapons close to the back door of the property after wiping them clean of fingerprints. Finally, MacDonald took a scalpel blade from the supply closet, entered the adjacent bathroom, and stabbed himself once in the chest while standing beside the sink before disposing of the surgical gloves. He had then used the family telephone to summon an ambulance before lying down beside Colette's body as he waited for the military police to arrive. So that's basically the CID theory reconstruction. Now, if it does in fact match all of the blood evidence, because each family member has a different blood type, so that obviously is helpful for, conducting this type of reconstruction. So, although again, if this was just messy across the board, it's kind of hard to say it's 100% definitive. I wonder what kind of forensics was done to see if he could definitively not have the injuries that he had with an ice pick or the other knife. I mean, was a scalpel blade really the only way he could have stabbed himself? And why would he do that? Why wouldn't, if he is guilty and he's trying to make it set it up to make it look like he was also attacked, why wouldn't he use the ice pick or the other knife? I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of questions here. I mean, then again, if he snapped, obviously his decisions might not be logical in any way, but it's still curious as to how he came up with all of this. And yeah, I mean, brain fingerprint scan, that's the way to go, obviously. Interrogation. April 6, 1970, Army investigators formally cautioned, then interrogated MacDonald. He was first offered the chance to recount his version of events, then recounted his claims of being attacked by 4 intruders with whom he grappled with before falling to the ground. Also, again, why would he pick 4? If he's guilty and it's making it all up, wouldn't he just say 1, maybe 2 nondescript individuals dressed all in black? Then again, if he did have a psychotic break of some kind, So he recounted his claims of being attacked by 4 intruders with whom he grappled with before falling to the ground, observing the top of some boots, and being rendered unconscious before regaining consciousness, experiencing symptoms of pneumothorax in the hallway after the intruders had left. Investigators were unconvinced of MacDonald's accounts. Midway through questioning, MacDonald was asked a question about his stab wounds by CID investigator William Ivory. "You didn't do it yourself, did you?" This question prompted MacDonald to deny the accusation before referencing his puncture wound and his having to persuade hospital doctors to insert a chest tube into his body as he was sure his lung was punctured. Questioning then focused upon the crime scene and results of the forensic testing. MacDonald denied any of the murder weapons had originated from his household, despite the fact that the section of lumber matched wood from Kimberly's closet. Well, did it match wood as being the same type of wood, or was it conclusively proven to be exactly the same type of wood? He also claimed to be unaware of how the fiber and blood evidence contradicted his accounts of his movements and actions. Investigator Robert Shaw then questioned MacDonald as to the lack of disorder and damage within the household and the lack of any motive, stating that investigators' experience had 4 intruders embarked on a murderous frenzy within a small household, they would expect to encounter evidence such as busted furniture, broken mirrors, and bashed-in walls. But the only signs of the struggle were the top-heavy living room coffee table, which had not flipped over all the way in the midst of a struggle, and a flower pot beside the table with the plant upon the carpet and the pot standing upright. Then again, if he was going to stage a struggle, wouldn't he try to smash the pot and make more damage? See, this is, again, why certain cases like this one here are so difficult, because you would think if he's staging some kind of a struggle with not one, but 2 or 3 individuals, he would go out of his way to make sure it looked like a damn struggle so people would believe it. But if it was a real struggle, in a real struggle, weird things happen where a pot might still be standing upright or whatnot, even in some kind of commotion. Because again, look to like a Hollywood movie, people think a struggle is going to result in a ton of damage. And depending on the kind of struggle, it would. So if you're staging a struggle, wouldn't a person be more likely to stage a little bit too much rather than too little if they're trying to convince people a struggle took place? Yeah, this is tough. MacDonald was unable to offer a plausible explanation for this observation and also claimed to be unaware of how Kimberly's blood and brain serum were recovered from the master bedroom. Also, if he's telling the truth and he was unconscious, he would be unaware of how all that happened. Following a short break, questioning resumed the same afternoon. Investigator Franz Grebner listed further physical discrepancies between MacDonald's account and the forensic evidence, repeatedly stating all the facts pointed to his having staged the crime scene. And if he did, obviously he didn't do that great job of staging it. MacDonald was unable to offer a plausible explanation to this questioning before abruptly accusing Grebner of having run out of ideas and attempting to frame him to maintain a 100% solved homicide rate. Well, that's curious, especially if MacDonald knew for a fact what his clearance rate actually was. In response, Grebner stated, quote, we have all this business here that would tend to indicate that you were involved in this rather than people who came in from the outside and picked 544 Castle Drive and went up there and were lucky enough to find your door open, end quote. I mean, that is true. It seems like if he's telling the truth about the intruders and the killers here, it seems like someone would have pointed them that way and this was somehow targeted. When investigators asked MacDonald to submit a polygraph test to verify his accounts, he readily agreed. Although within 10 minutes of the conclusion of the interview, he called investigators to state he had changed his mind and would not submit to any polygraph testing. Now that's curious too, because if he's telling the truth and he's emotional, he's like, oh yeah, of course I'll take it. Then after sitting there and thinking about it for a while, if he had read how they were inconclusive, and then he might have said, wait a second, maybe that's not smart. And that's why he changed his mind. See, there are quite a few pieces pointing to his innocence here that I could already see right off the bat, unless he's just that mentally unwell, in which case they wouldn't point to his innocence. Formal charges. On the evening of April 6th, MacDonald was relieved of his duties and placed under restriction pending further inquiries. The following day, he was assigned an Army lawyer. At the recommendation of his mother, on April 10th, he instead hired a flamboyant civilian defense attorney, Bernard Siegel, to defend him. Less than a month later, May 1st, the Army formally charged MacDonald with 3 counts of murder. That same day, MacDonald penned a letter to Colette's mother and stepfather, professing his innocence, emphasizing the Army would never admit their error, and speculating his wife's soul may hold infinite patience and understanding of his current legal predicament. Okay, so what does this mean? Why wait until being formally charged? So again, this is, it is curious. So what did the Army tell Colette's mother and stepfather? Because if they told them nothing, then maybe he would wait until the formal charges became public to pen this letter. Otherwise, what would he say prior to that? I mean, yeah, it's tough. Without knowing all of the correspondence that took place prior, it's really impossible to gauge what that could mean. Army hearing, an initial Army Article 32 hearing into MacDonald's possible guilt, overseen by Colonel Warren Rock, convened on July 6, 1970. This hearing lasted until September. MacDonald's lawyer, Bernard Siegel, adopted an offensive strategy on behalf of his client at this hearing, citing numerous examples of incompetence on behalf of the Army CID, stating that they had clumsily and unprofessionally trampled all over the crime scene during their examination of the house, obliterating any traces of evidence the perpetrators might have left, and losing vital pieces of evidence, including a single thread found between Kimberly's nail, MacDonald's pajama trousers. Wait, they lost his trousers? 4 torn tips of rubber surgical gloves found in the master bedroom, and a single layer of skin found between one of Colette's fingernails. Siegel elicited several examples of incompetence from military police and responding personnel, including testimony revealing an ambulance driver had stolen MacDonald's wallet from the living room, and a pathologist who testified to having failed to obtain the children's fingerprints for comparison at the crime scene. Yeah, that's a lot of incompetence. That is a lot of incompetence. Now, that doesn't mean he's innocent, of course, because even if he's guilty, that doesn't mean that these incompetent people aren't incompetent. But the incompetence is a problem. It's a problem. The first witness to testify in MacDonald's defense, responding military policeman Kenneth Micah, testified that on the way to answering MacDonald's emergency call on the night of the murders, he had observed a blonde woman with a wide-brimmed hat standing on a street corner approximately half a mile from the MacDonald home. He noted that this sighting was unusual given the late hour and the weather. Mika also testified that contrary to instruction, an ambulance driver had placed the tilted flower pot upright while at the crime scene. Okay, we're in Mindshock land now. So what are the possibilities? MacDonald paid this guy off, or coincidentally, there's a woman in a wide-brimmed hat on the street corner a half a mile from the home, and at a late hour, and the weather, which again, back in this time period, in this location, was highly unusual. Yeah, we're definitely in Mindshock land now. Colonel Rock also testified that he himself went to the scene of the crime and tipped the coffee table over, with it striking the edge of a rocking chair and coming to rest on its edge. Rock also noted that the fact that if no wet footprints and mud were found at the crime scene belonging to the alleged intruders, that meant the crime scene investigators had also failed to find any evidence of the large number of military police and civilians who also walked around the house. That's a good point. That's a good point. So if there's no evidence of any wet footprints, if they're incapable of finding any footprints, that means they wouldn't find footprints of the perpetrators, even if the perpetrators were real. Yeah, we're getting into Mindshock territory, that's for sure. Suspect ID. In August, Siegel, not Seagal. I don't think this guy's not related to Steven Seagal. This is Segal, not Seagal. was approached by a delivery man named William Posey, who claimed the blonde woman MacDonald stated had attacked his family might have been a local 17-year-old drug addict and police informant named Helena Werrell Stokeley. According to Posey, Stokeley had been in the company of 2 or 3 young males in a car parked outside her apartment at approximately 4 a.m. on the morning of the murders. Posey also claims Stokeley had ceased wearing her boots and floppy hat subsequent to February 17th and had dressed in black on the date of the funerals, also stating to him that she did not remember what she did on the date of the murders. Posey later relayed this info at the hearing, adding that Stokeley had informed him months later that she and her boyfriend could not marry until, quote, we go out and kill some more people, end quote. Wow. Okay, so if this is true, so if this delivery man has not been paid off by the MacDonald camp, I guess the guilters would say that's their argument, right? That this guy made it all up because he was paid off. If he's telling the truth, so if the delivery man, William Posey, is telling the truth here, so Stokeley just happened to be a 17-year-old drug addict and police informant who regularly wore these wide-brimmed floppy hats and boots, high-heeled boots. She just never wore them again after the murders. And then so apparently she doesn't usually dress in black, but she just so happened to dress in black on the date of the funerals. And she just so happened to tell her boyfriend that they couldn't marry until, quote, we go out and kill some more people, end quote. So I suppose theoretically it is possible that her and her boyfriend and these other people, they've killed people and they just happen to not kill MacDonald and his family, and it's all coincidental. Let's not fall for false dichotomies here. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities. But we are so firmly in Mindshock land. Now, that's hard to write off. That's definitely hard to write off. I mean, again, brain fingerprint scan. Okay, continuing on here, Stokeley was located and questioned regarding her whereabouts on February 17th. So there was a search, but they couldn't find them? So they're relatively local, so why wouldn't they be able to find them unless they did find them? So if she is a police informant and she's on some kind of list on, not to be agitated with her and other people she's informing on or with or other informants possibly, yeah, this is looking bad. This is starting to look real bad. So she was questioned regarding her whereabouts February 17th. Her answers were vague and self-contradictory. She recalled being in the company of her boyfriend, Gregory Mitchell, on the night of February 16th and going out for a ride in a car in the early hours of the following day, driving aimlessly, but claimed to have been so far out on mescaline that she could not say for sure whether she had been at the house or not. So not only did she not deny or refuse to answer, she admitted that her and her boyfriend were out riding during those same hours while high on drugs, and she actually couldn't state definitively whether she was or wasn't at the house. So she left the option on the table that they actually had gone to MacDonald's house. This is insane. This is insane. Although witnesses had claimed Stokeley had admitted her involvement in the murders, with several also remembering her wearing clothing similar to that described by MacDonald on the date in question, she was not subpoenaed to testify. Wow. Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm out here. I mean, come on. Whether he's innocent or guilty, whether she's innocent or guilty, the fact that they not only tracked someone down matching the description by multiple people and multiple people claiming she admitted involvement in the murders, they didn't even bother to subpoena her to even testify so that they could investigate and actually see whether or not she was innocent or guilty. They didn't even bother to do that. So clearly this is a wrongful conviction. Even if he's guilty, it's clearly a wrongful conviction at this point. Procedural irregularities regarding investigative conduct into Stokeley were also highlighted by Siegel at this hearing. MacDonald's testimony Following favorable character testimony from several acquaintances and a military psychiatrist, MacDonald testified for 3 days in mid-August. Sections of his testimony contradicted what he had informed investigators on April 6th, including his claim on this occasion to have actually moved Colette's body, having found her a little bit propped up against a chair before he just sort of laid her out on the floor. He also stated that possibly because of his surgical background, he had sort of rinsed off his hands as he checked his own injuries in the bathroom before calling for help. Referencing the type B blood found in the kitchen, MacDonald testified that he may have also washed his hands in the kitchen sink for some reason prior to making the phone call to emergency services. Contrary to medical reports and his earlier accounts, he also claimed to have located 2 bumps on the back of his head and 2 or 3 puncture wounds in his upper left chest, other wounds to his right bicep, and approximately 10 ice pick wounds to his abdomen on February 17th or 18th, all of which had healed without treatment and none of which had required surgery. Interesting. That's also interesting. Question in regards to his infidelity, MacDonald admitted he had been unfaithful on 2 occasions, but insisted Colette had not known about either affair. He also claimed their time at Fort Bragg had been the most content of their married life. MacDonald's testimony was followed by that of a clinical psychologist who testified as to the conclusions of a series of tests he had conducted on MacDonald. This expert testified that the tests revealed an extraordinary absence of anxiety, depression, and anger in MacDonald with regard to the loss of his family, and that his report concluded that he was able to muster massive denial or repression to such a degree that the impact of the recent events in his life had been blunted. Furthermore, this extreme psychological response would likely see an individual convey himself as victimized and perhaps somewhat of a martyr. So again, is that common for people to go through this? It's so emotionally taxing, you kind of just turn off the emotions, especially for a military man. It would seem like that's obviously a real possibility. Again, innocent or guilty doesn't really, in either of those situations, this could be the outcome mentally. The initial dismissal of charges, to the chagrin of Colonel Kruanek, on October 13th, 1970, Colonel Rock issued a report recommending that charges be dismissed against MacDonald as insufficient evidence existed to prove his guilt, adding his belief no truth existed in the charges, and that the nature of the murders led him to believe the perpetrator or perpetrators were either insane or under the influence of drugs. And was MacDonald drug tested the night of? That'd be curious. Rock also, they have his blood anyway because he was attacked, so they could do the test. Rock also recommended that civilian authorities further investigate Stokeley. Later the same month, all charges were formally dismissed, although a new CID investigation tasked with finding the murderer or murderers was assembled February 71, with MacDonald still considered a suspect. In December, MacDonald received an honorable discharge from the Army and initially returned to New York City, where he briefly worked as a doctor before relocating to Long Beach, California in July 71 in an effort to put the past behind him and to distance himself from the constant reminders of his wife and daughters. He obtained employment as an emergency room physician at the St. Mary Medical Center, frequently working long hours. He also became an instructor at the UCLA Medical School, a medical director of the Long Beach Grand Prix, a lecturer on the subject of the recognition and treatment of child abuse, and a participant in the development of a national cardiopulmonary resuscitation training program. MacDonald lived in a $350,000 Huntington Beach condominium apartment and is known to have lived a promiscuous lifestyle prior to forming a long-term relationship with a 22-year-old airline stewardess named Candy Kramer in the late 70s. Wow, is that her real name? In the years immediately following the dismissal of the murder charges, MacDonald received an abundance of emotional and public support. He also wrote letters to several magazines and newspapers detailing his willingness to further publicize the background and legalities of his case. That's curious too, because, that's curious. Further investigation. Within days of the dismissal, MacDonald began granting press interviews and media appearances, most notably on the December 15th, 1970 episode of The Dick Cavett Show, during which he appeared flippant as he complained about the Army investigation and their focus on him as a suspect.
Jeffrey MacDonald. I hope this isn't too painful for you.
My wife came home and we had a before bedtime drink, really, and watched the beginning of a late-night talk show. There were people in the Army who wanted a court-martial, regardless of any evidence.
Where are these investigators now who did the original?
Well, most of them have been transferred. It's the Army way of handling things. If someone really fouls up, you either give them a medal or you transfer them.
On this occasion, he claimed to have sustained 23 wounds, some of which he claimed were potentially fatal. See, here's the thing. I mean, I have to interrupt here again. See, if there was no existence of Stokeley and her boyfriend, if Stokeley didn't exist, then this case you'd have to lean guilty. If this druggie and possible police informant did not exist, then this would be such an easier case. Would it not? At least on the surface. MacDonald's stepfather, Alfred Kassab, had initially believed in his stepson-in-law's innocence. Both he and Colette's mother, Mildred, had testified in support of MacDonald during the Army's Article 32 hearing, informing the press, quote, "My wife and I feel very strongly about Captain MacDonald's innocence. After all, it was our daughter and 2 grandchildren who were butchered," end quote. However, by November 1970, Kassab had grown suspicious of MacDonald's repeated reluctance to provide him with a copy of the 2,000-page transcript of the Article 32 hearing. In an apparent effort to discourage Kassab's efforts to obtain a copy of this transcript in his pursuit of the killers, MacDonald told his stepfather-in-law that he and some Army colleagues had actually tracked down, tortured, and eventually murdered one of the 4 alleged murderers. Wow. Okay, I thought we were in Mindshock land before. I mean, we're definitely there now. I mean, we are definitely there now. Okay. Wow. So here's the thing. What if he did do that? Then what? Because how would we know? I mean, if MacDonald does have a certain level of intelligence, I mean, this is tough. And obviously he would only tell this, possibly the family of of Colette. Why would he tell anybody else about this? I mean, again, obviously a brain fingerprint scan would solve this problem, but there also could be other reasons, undisclosed or otherwise, why he wouldn't want that transcript given to Kassab. We can't just immediately assume he's guilty. I mean, and that transcript is available to other personnel, so it's not, I mean, what could possibly be that damning in? I mean, this is weird. So, Kassab's suspicion greatly increased following MacDonald's casual and dismissive demeanor on the Dick Cavett show just days after he himself hand-delivered 500 copies of an 11-page letter to members of Congress requesting a congressionally mandated reinvestigation of the murders, and he and his wife publicly turned against MacDonald. Is it also possible MacDonald was just on some kind of drugs or something to relax himself for the show? Yeah, I mean, that's tough. Or is he just that resentful of being a suspect? Because if he's innocent, I mean, how would he feel being accused of that? Of, the people he loved the most, if he's innocent, of course. I mean, yeah, it's tough to read into this. It's pretty tough. Kassab successfully obtained a copy of the Article 32 transcript from the Army in February 1971. He repeatedly studied the document, realizing MacDonald's claims were inconsistent with the physical facts, and concluding his account was nothing more than a tissue of lies that repeatedly contradicted the known facts of the case. One example was MacDonald's assertion that he had sustained life-threatening injuries, including 10 ice pick wounds during the alleged physical assault at the hands of his assailants. Kassab had met MacDonald in hospital less than 18 hours after the attack and had observed him sitting up in bed, eating a meal with very little bandaging or medical dressing on his body. An examination of hospital records confirmed MacDonald had received no such wounds. Kassab also discovered that within weeks of the murders of his family, MacDonald had begun dating a young woman employed at Fort Bragg. He and his wife also later discovered that by 1969 he had rekindled his relationship with Penny Wells. You know what's weird? Daryl Routier in the Darlie Routier case, supposedly after Darlie's in prison, his son's killed, he actually went back with his girlfriend that he had before Darlie Routier. Is that curious? Because we see is there a pattern of that with guilty individuals more so than innocent individuals? Because again, that seems a little tough too, just because if someone wants some kind of mental comfort, you would either reach back into the past, something comforting and familiar, or of course you try to find something new. But yeah, again, it's so hard because in both innocent and guilty situations, you could see maybe it unfolding in similar fashions. With the cooperation of Colonel Kriwanek and other Army investigators, Kassab visited the crime scene for several hours in order to compare the physical evidence against MacDonald's testimony in March 1971. Also, did MacDonald know about this druggie Stokeley and what she usually wore? Did he not make up these attackers? Did he make the attackers match people he saw in the area on purpose so that if somebody tracked them down, they would possibly have a suspect? But how could he have guessed that she was high and driving around randomly unless that's what she always did and he somehow knew about that? But then what about the supposed confessions that she had? Yeah, I mean, nothing really adds up here. It's very, very tough. Very tough indeed. The personal assessment ultimately convinced Kassab of MacDonald's guilt, and he resolved to devote his life to pursuing all legal avenues to bring MacDonald to justice. As the Army's investigation was completed, the only way Kassab could bring MacDonald to trial was via a citizen's complaint filed through the United States Department of Justice. He filed this complaint in early 1972. However, because the murders had occurred while MacDonald was serving in the Army and had since been discharged, the citizen's complaint was declared moot. The FBI refused to take on the case. And also, did they just want the case buried regardless of what happened? Because of some possible connections to other things? I mean, you'd really have to do a deep dive into MacDonald's history. Was he involved in anything top secret? Or maybe not top secret, but just something that would look badly? He found something out about somebody or just something of that nature that made him a target? Legal maneuvers. Between 72 and 74, the case remained trapped in limbo in the Department of Justice as legal issues were raised and debated over which sufficient evidence and probable cause existed for indictment and prosecution. On April 30th, 1974, the Kassabs, their attorney Richard Kahn, and CID agent Peter Kearns presented a citizen's complaint against MacDonald to the U.S. Chief District Court Judge Algernon Butler, requesting the convening of a grand jury to indict MacDonald for the murders. The following month, Justice Department Attorney Victor Warhide ruled the case worthy of prosecution. Grand jury. August 12, 1974. A grand jury convened before U.S. District Judge Frank Dupree in Raleigh, North Carolina to hear the legal proceedings. 75 witnesses were called to testify. MacDonald was the first individual to testify at this hearing. His testimony lasted 5 days, during which he conceded that although he had publicly resolved to pursue all legal avenues during the 1970 dismissal of the murder charges against him and to hire investigators, he had failed to do so. Nonetheless, he was adamant he had made his own efforts to identify the perpetrators and to locate Helena Stokeley. He also claimed the numerous... See, here's the thing. If he did find who was responsible and he killed the guy, I mean, would he necessarily kill all four, or would that be too obvious? Or who knows? It depends on who they were and what kind of criminal element it was. Because it does seem strange that he would just forget about this and move past it, unless he did find who was responsible and made them pay. Or if there is some kind of overlapping military or government conspiracy, he was too scared to, or he realized that it was futile to pursue. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of different possibilities here, innocent or guilty. So, yeah, without more information on all of that, it's really tough. He also claimed the numerous fabrications he had provided to the Kassabs and to sections of the media in the intervening years were to placate his in-laws, and that he had received more stab and puncture wounds to his body than recorded in contemporary medical records, which he blamed on malpractice. Here's the thing, if the fix was in, would they have intentionally downplayed and not recorded injuries? Yeah, that's tough. When asked by Victor Warhide if he would submit to either a polygraph, or sodium amytal test to verify his version of events, MacDonald read a statement prepared by his attorneys denying their request. Other witnesses to testify included surgeons on duty at Womack Hospital who had examined MacDonald's and who testified aside from his punctured lung, MacDonald was, quote, not in any great danger medically, end quote. And that save for a superficial stab wound to his upper left arm and abdomen, MacDonald had no other stab wounds to his body. A reporter who had covered the Article 32 hearing and who had interviewed MacDonald after the charges were dropped also stated that in his experience, individuals under the influence of LSD seldom became violent, and that by contrast, those who consume amphetamines frequently do. December 12th, a former chief of psychiatry had also testified at the Article 32 hearing. Bruce Bailey testified. Bailey said that when discussing his family and the events surrounding their deaths with him, MacDonald would occasionally, quote, become emotional, become tearful, but he recovered quickly, end quote. Well, again, innocent or guilty, that could be the case. That doesn't tell us anything. Bailey also testified he found MacDonald to be a controlling, although if he was a complete sociopath, psychopath, unless he was faking, perhaps he would not become emotional. Bailey also testified he found MacDonald to be a controlling individual who was extremely dependent on what others thought of him, and that he would often launch into a verbal tirade to allow his deep-seated emotions to become expressed by other means. When questioned as to whether MacDonald suffered from a mental disorder, Bailey testified he did not, although he could not discount the possibility of him murdering family members in a situation of extreme stress. Isn't that true of everybody, though? This testimony was followed by a Philadelphia, or at least people who have no other violent incidents other than the incident when they snapped and killed family members. This testimony was followed by a Philadelphia-based psychologist who conceded that had MacDonald committed such an act of violence, he would successfully completely block the episode from his mind. But I mean, innocent people also block that from their mind. So, yeah, that's tough. The chief of the FBI's crime laboratory chemistry section, Paul Stombaugh, then testified the pajama top placed over Colette's body had been heavily blood-stained before the garment was torn. And that, contrary to MacDonald's claims, a lack of tearing at the edges of these holes proved that all 48 holes within this item of clothing had been inflicted while the garment was stationary rather than in motion. Stombaugh also testified all the cuts within all garments other than the pajama top had been inflicted with the old hickory kitchen knife found outside the family home and not the paring knife he claimed to have removed from Colette's body. That the majority of the blood had belonged to Colette and her blood had transferred onto the garment on at least 4 locations prior to the garment being torn. Furthermore, the club used to bludgeon Colette and Kimberley, which MacDonald had denied any knowledge of, had also been sawed from one of the mattress slats in Kimberley's bedroom, and a single hair found in Colette's right palm had sourced from her own body and not a blonde-haired intruder. Interesting. Again, if there's a cover-up afoot, obviously they could frame it that way. But here's the thing, too. Is he innocent, but then he thought he could be blamed as guilty, and then that messed up some of his story? Because let's say he's super smart. If he's super smart and innocent, but also stressed out in the moment of all this commotion going on, what would he do, and would he change what he said? I mean, again, yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough. Further testimony, MacDonald was recalled to testify before the grand jury January 21st, 1975. On this occasion, he was markedly arrogant and sarcastic when questioned with regards to issues such as his infidelity or the prosecution's illustration of forensic contradictions between his version of events and the physical evidence. On one occasion, shouting, quote, "I have no idea. I don't even know what crap you're trying to feed me," end quote. Here's the thing, though. This is so traumatic. Is it possible this whole ordeal had such an effect on his psyche that this is the result. And if he is innocent, could you blame him for having to have lived through all of this? And if he's guilty, it seems like he wouldn't be that smart because he's allowing, unless he's guilty and also has some kind of a psychic break as a result of the guilt, and then in which case maybe he would behave this way. But yeah, it's pretty tough. So he said this in response to a question as how his blood and Colette's blood had transferred onto a sheet taken from Kristen's bedroom into the master bedroom. He also refused to discuss the results of a private polygraph test to which he had consented in 1970, the results of which had been given to Bernard Siegel, indicating he would have to speak with his attorney on this matter before consenting to this line of inquiry. Yeah, it would be interesting to know the results of that test as well. Following a brief recess, MacDonald read a statement prepared by his attorneys denying the prosecution's request to discuss the results of his 1970 polygraph examination, contending Warhide had violated attorney-client privilege. He then read his own statement to the jury, claiming 5 long years had passed since the murder of his family and his efforts to start life afresh, and that his questions posed by the prosecutions were ones that had to live with for 5 years. Indictment. On January 24th, 75, the grand jury formally indicted MacDonald on 3 counts of murders. Within the hour, he was arrested in California. On January 31st, he was freed upon a $100,000 bail raised by friends and colleagues, pending disposition of the charges, although he was arraigned on May 23rd and pled not guilty to the murders on this date. On July 29th, Judge Dupree denied the double jeopardy and speedy trial arguments successfully filed by his attorneys and allowed the proposed trial date of August 18th, 75 to stand. Although the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled to stay the proceedings on August 15th, the panel of this court ordered the indictment dismissed on the grounds of a defendant's right to a speedy trial on January 23rd, 76. MacDonald himself later claimed to weep tears of relief rather than tears of joy upon hearing the news, and later recollected to return to a big celebration that his ordeal was now over. An appeal on behalf of the government led to a reinstatement of the indictment via an 8-0 margin within the U.S. Supreme Court, May 1st, 78. In response to this decision, Alfred Kassab informed the press he and his wife welcomed the development, stating, quote, "It has been a tremendous personal pressure to have someone running around that you are convinced killed your daughter and grandchildren," end quote. You know what's interesting? The phrasing of that. How smart is Alfred Kassab? Because he didn't state, like most people would state, oh, to have a guilty individual, running around. He's stating it's a tremendous personal pressure to have someone running around that you are convinced killed your daughter and grandchildren. So he's just stating that he's personally convinced. That doesn't mean it's the actual truth. Interesting. On October 22nd, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected MacDonald's double jeopardy arguments. The Supreme Court refused to review this decision March 1979. A quote from Alfred Kassab commenting on the inconsistencies in MacDonald's accounts of his actions and wounds sustained on the night of the murders, as contained in the transcript of the Article 32 hearing, 76, the story, as MacDonald told it, had to be a fabrication. It could not have happened the way he said it happened. None of his story holds together. I mean, none of what he says he did. He claims to have been attacked in the living room. He claims to have sustained 10 ice pick wounds. Now those 10 ice pick wounds nobody has ever seen. No doctor in the hospital ever saw them. Trial. MacDonald was brought to trial on July 16, 79, charged with 3 counts of murder. He was tried in Raleigh, North Carolina before Judge Dupree and pled not guilty to the charges. MacDonald was defended by Bernard Siegel and Wade Smith. James Blackburn and Brian Murtaugh prosecuted the case. Initial jury selection began on this date and will continue for 3 days. Although MacDonald's lawyers had been confident of an acquittal, there was successful rulings against the defense. The first such ruling was Judge Dupree's refusal to admit into evidence a 79 psychiatric evaluation of MacDonald, which suggested that an individual of his personality and mindset was highly unlikely to be capable of killing his family. Dupree justified this refusal by stating that as MacDonald's attorney had not entered an insanity plea for their client, he did not wish for the trial to be hindered by opinionated and contradictory psychiatric testimony from prosecution and defense witnesses. A further defense setback was the judge's ruling against a motion to suppress the introduction of MacDonald's pajama top as evidence. On the first day of trial, Judge Dupree allowed the prosecution to admit into evidence the March 1970 copy of Esquire magazine found in the MacDonald house, part of which contained the lengthy article relating to the Manson family murders. However, Dupree also refused the prosecution's request to allow any sections of the earlier Article 32 transcripts from MacDonald's 1970 Army hearing to be produced as evidence, ruling that as the current trial was a civilian trial and the Article 32 military hearing held several reports from the military investigators which had suggested that MacDonald had murdered his family in a drug-induced rage, this evidence was also opinionated. That's interesting. Okay, so he doesn't appear to be favoring either side. Opening statements. In his opening statement to the jury delivered on July 19th, James Blackburn outlined the burden of proof the prosecution faced in proving MacDonald's guilt, that the prosecution intended to meet this burden, and that the murders had been committed with malice aforethought. Blackburn then outlined the prosecution's intention to outline both physical and circumstantial evidence indicating MacDonald's guilt, and to introduce numerous witnesses, imploring the jurors to listen to the evidence that comes from the witness stand, to examine the evidence as it is shown to you, and to reach your own conclusion. Blackburn finished his opening statement by stating to the jurors, quote, basically we believe that the physical evidence points to the fact that unfortunately one person, not 2, 3, or 4 or more, killed Colette, Kimberley, and Kristen, and that person is the defendant, end quote. Wade Smith then argued on behalf of the defense. Smith referenced the events of February 17, 1970, the Army investigation and subsequent dismissal of all charges, repeatedly emphasizing the case had occurred over 9 years ago, and that in the intervening years, Jeff had done his utmost to rebuild his life, while others would not allow him to forget his painful past. Their client had now been brought to trial to face the charges of murdering his wife and children. Smith emphasized to the jurors their ability to relieve their client of this ongoing ordeal by acquitting him of all charges. Testimony. One of the chief prosecution witnesses to testify was Paul Stumbaugh, whom the prosecution summoned to testify on August 7th. Stumbaugh demonstrated to the jurors how MacDonald's pajama top had been pierced by 48 small, smooth, and cylindrical ice pick holes after the garment had been placed atop his wife's chest. Stumbaugh contended that in order for the holes to have been as smooth and devoid of fraying or tearing, the garment would have had to remain stationary, an extremely unlikely occurrence if, as MacDonald contended, he had wrapped it around his hands to defend himself from blows from an attacker wielding an ice pick or club. Furthermore, Stumbaugh demonstrated that by folding the garment in the manner depicted in the crime scene photographs, all 48 holes could have been made by 21 thrusts of the ice pick through the garment, and an identical pattern implying Colette had been repeatedly stabbed through the pajama top while the garment was lying on her body. Although Siegel subjected Stumbaugh to a harsh cross-examination, repeatedly raising his voice as he challenged Stumbaugh's credentials and forensic methods, Stumbaugh remained steadfast as to his conclusion. A further piece of damaging evidence against MacDonald was an audio tape made of the April 6, 1970 interview by military investigators, which was played in the courtroom immediately after the jurors had returned from visiting the still intact crime scene. The jury heard MacDonald's matter-of-fact, indifferent recitation of the murders. They heard him become angry, defensive, and emotional in response to suggestions by the investigators that he had committed to the murders. He asked the investigators why would they think he, who had a beautiful family and everything going for him, would have murdered his family in cold blood for no reason. The jury also heard investigators later confront him with their knowledge of his extramarital affairs, to which MacDonald murmured, "Oh, you guys are more thorough than I thought." That's an interesting statement. Despite earlier rulings against the defense counsel, the prosecution was also hampered by the lack of an obvious motive for MacDonald to have committed the murders. He had no history of violence or domestic abuse against his wife or children. The defense also argued the crime scene was hopelessly compromised during the investigation, and potential evidence was either destroyed, was lost, or remained uncollected. MacDonald's defense attorneys also called several favorable character witnesses, plus a forensic expert named James Thornton, to the stand. Thornton attempted to rebut Stumbaugh's contention that the pajama top was stationary on Colette's chest, rather than wrapped around MacDonald's wrist as he waited off blows, stating that he had attempted to stab a pajama top wrapped around a ham with an ice pick as an assistant moved the item back and forth, resulting in perfectly cylindrical holes with no tearing around the edges of the garment. Following Thornton's testimony, prosecutors Murtaugh and Blackburn staged an impromptu reenactment of the alleged attack on MacDonald. Murtaugh wrapped a pajama top of the same material around his hands and attempted to fend off a series of blows that Blackburn attempted to inflict on him with the ice pick used in the murders. The resulting ice pick holes in the pajama top were jagged and elongated, not smoothly cylindrical like the ones with the garment recovered upon Colette's body. Furthermore, Murtaugh received a small wound on his upper right arm. MacDonald had received no defensive wounds on his arms or hands consistent with a struggle. In addition, aside from a small smear of blood discovered upon the Esquire magazine and a single speck of blood upon MacDonald's spectacles, a speck of blood on his spectacles? Man, okay. No other traces of blood were recovered from the room in which MacDonald claimed to have fought for his life. Helena Stokeley. One of the final defense witnesses Siegel subpoenaed to testify was Helena Stokeley. Intent on extracting a confession from her that she had been one of the intruders MacDonald claimed had entered his house, murdered his family, and attacked him, Siegel talked to Stokeley in private for over 2 hours, attempting to persuade her to confess to end MacDonald's years of suffering unjustly, also promising her immunity from prosecution due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. There's a statute of limitations on murder? On murder of children? Stokeley repeatedly informed Siegel she was unable to help him. She also denied ever having seen MacDonald and refused to testify to acts that she was adamant she did not commit. Under oath, Stokeley denied any culpability in the murders and any knowledge of who may have committed the acts. Insistent she was unable to recall her whereabouts on the date of the murders, Stokeley emphasized her extensive drug use in 1970 and the intervening years, adding the night of February 16th to 17th, 1970 was by no means the first or last night in which she was unable to recall her whereabouts. Following this testimony, Murtaugh and Siegel alternatively argued before Judge Dupree for the dismissal or introduction of testimony from several witnesses to whom Stokeley had earlier allegedly confessed. I mean, I would like to hear from these witnesses as well. I mean, what's their story and why? On August 20th, Dupree refused the introduction of this testimony, citing legal trustworthiness requisites and stating the introduction of these witnesses could add no further value to the proceedings than what they had experienced from Stokeley's own testimony. What? Wait, what? Because Stokeley's denying it as if she is guilty. I guess she would, right? Or she's denying any memory of it. Even if she did do it, she doesn't remember doing it. But if she really did do it, these other people could shed light on that, especially if they take polygraphs. And what would be the result of such? So, yeah, Judge Dupree seemed relatively impartial up until this point. Because if she really is adamant that she doesn't know him, because if she did know him or he knew her, then he didn't invent these people. If he picked real people, even if he's guilty and lying, he picked people that were real and described them to further muddy the waters. But she's claiming she doesn't know him at all. Defendant's testimony. The final witness to testify on behalf of the defense was MacDonald himself, who testified on his own behalf August 23rd and 24th. MacDonald was first questioned by Bernard Siegel, who sought to humanize his client in the eyes of the jury. He began his questioning by asking MacDonald about his family. MacDonald described each family member and their individual personalities, stating that the family shared almost everything. We were all friends. Colette and I shared the children growing up. We shared our life experiences. He also claimed the reason he had never remarried was the fact that he was unable to forget his wife and children, who he thought about daily. Siegel then asked MacDonald to recount his family background, his career at Fort Bragg, and his family's general lifestyle, February 1970. He then produced several family photographs and artifacts, asking MacDonald to describe each item or the circumstances surrounding each photograph and to identify the individual in each image. MacDonald then recounted his life in the years since the deaths of his family, describing his decision to relocate to California as an effort to distance himself from well-wishers, and insisting the reason he worked up to 80 hours a week was that it was easier than sitting and thinking about his family. You know, another curiosity that we didn't really talk about yet, what if MacDonald wasn't the target and it had nothing to do with him? What about Colette? Did she know Stokeley? Stokeley said she didn't know MacDonald. What about Colette? Was she even asked if she knew Colette? How many people did Colette interact with? If someone was really angry with Colette, they might not even bother to kill MacDonald. They would just want to kill her and her children. Was that avenue even investigated? Because she took classes. So it wasn't like she was home the whole time. She was out and about interacting with many different people. The following day, James Blackburn cross-examined MacDonald. He outlined every piece of physical and circumstantial evidence recovered at the crime scene, which contradicted MacDonald's own accounts of the assailants attacking him and murdering his family, and instead indicated his own guilt. Blackburn typically began each question with a statement to the effect of, "Dr. MacDonald, should the jury find from the evidence?" MacDonald was unable to offer any plausible explanations for these discrepancies. For example, he was unable to explain how the piece of lumber used as a weapon came from a mattress slat on Kimberly's bed, but claimed that there may have been some wood in the utility room, later adding his insistence the club which had struck him across the head was sort of smooth and may have been a baseball bat as opposed to a wooden instrument. He also claimed the earlier testimony of Army investigators pertaining to his questioning on April 6, 1970 was unreliable due to the poor conduct of the investigators and the fact several weeks had elapsed between the murders and his formal questioning. Those are fair points. And again, if he's staging all this himself, why would what is the prosecution alleging here? He took a wooden slat from his daughter's bed that obviously would be found out. Obviously, they would find that out. And claimed to have never seen it. Is that really more likely than an acid-tripping psychotic involved in slashing and killing, seeing a wooden slat and just randomly deciding, oh, they want that slat to continue killing in some kind of induced hallucinations or otherwise? I mean, I don't know. What do all the Mindshock listeners think is more likely? Because he knew they would know where that wood would come from. So, I mean, it's really weird. It's really weird. And again, if he's staging, wouldn't he stage a believable fight scene in the living room and knock over more stuff? I mean, it's not that hard to knock over some stuff. Yeah, this is really weird. This is really weird. When questioning MacDonald with regards to various discrepancies in his accounts of his movements, the injuries he sustained, and the positioning of his pajama jacket upon his body throughout the night of the murders with regards to the tearing and fiber evidence sourcing from the garment, Blackburn succeeded in highlighting several discrepancies in MacDonald's accounts by comparison to previous interview transcripts and his current claims and the contradictions of this testimony with forensics evidence. In response, Siegel repeatedly raised objections to this line of questioning, claiming the discrepancies were misleading. His objections were frequently overruled. Following a brief recess, Blackburn resumed his cross-examination. On this occasion, he illustrated instances of MacDonald adjusting his testimony regarding having moved his wife's body after learning fibers from his pajama top were found beneath her body. He then asked direct questions regarding the location of blood, fiber, and other physical evidence within his apartment, which directly contradicted his accounts of his movements and those of members of his family. Blackburn frequently accompanied these questions with a hypothetical suggestion that, quote, if the jury should find from the evidence, end quote, forensic or circumstantial evidence which contradicted MacDonald's testimony, would he have any plausible explanation for these discrepancies? MacDonald did frequently attempt to rebuff this line of questioning, but was typically unable to offer any explanation for this evidence. Closing arguments. On August 28, 1979, both counsels delivered the closing arguments before the jury. James Blackburn argued first, beginning by contrasting the injuries inflicted upon Colette, Kimberley, and Kristen with those suffered by MacDonald. He then outlined the medical testimony which listed the sole serious injury MacDonald had sustained as the pneumothorax wound to his chest, stating that even if the prosecution conceded the wound was potentially life-threatening, the wound was the sole serious injury he had sustained. Referencing the life and death struggle MacDonald claimed to have engaged in with the alleged intruders, Blackburn stated the evidence indicated a struggle had occurred in the MacDonald home, but this struggle was between only one white male and one white female. The white female was Colette and the white male was her husband. Okay, so another thought here. If his account is true and he really was sleeping and these killers engaged in all of this and then they were on their way out when MacDonald engaged them and they were trying to leave as soon as possible after all this carnage, would they not stick around and stab him 33 times like they did the others? Would they just try to put him down as quickly as possible and run away? I don't know. It's again, like everything, it's really tough. But if that is true and they're kind of just trying to get away, and maybe these guys are not as high as the blonde woman who wants him hurt more and more, and they just run off with her. Is she the only one that's really high? Because that could theoretically explain that. At least to a certain degree. Blackburn then poured scorn on the character witnesses who had earlier testified MacDonald had been a good husband and father, then returned to the evidence stating, quote, if we convince you by the evidence he did it, we don't have to show you he is the sort of person that could have done it, end quote. He then closed his initial argument by saying, quote, I can only tell you from the physical evidence that things do not lie, but I suggest that people can and do, end quote. like those interpreting the evidence. The following day, Bernard Siegel and Wade Smith delivered their closing arguments on behalf of the defense. Siegel focused much of his closing argument upon the campaign of persecution his client had been subjected to and by the legal system for almost a decade in an attempt to frame him for the murder of his family, describing the prosecution's case as a house built on sand. Portraying MacDonald as a loving husband and father, Siegel then emphasized MacDonald's insistence from the outset that 4 intruders had been responsible for the murders. Siegel spoke for over 3 hours using virtually all of the defense's allotted time. Blackburn and Murtaugh agreed to forfeit 10 minutes of their allocated rebuttal time to allow Smith to make an argument to the jury. Following a brief recess, Smith appealed to the jurors to question the lack of an obvious motive for MacDonald to have committed the murders. He referenced the family photographs of MacDonald enjoying the company of his wife and children in the years and even weeks before their deaths, stating, quote, "It makes no sense, there is no motive," end quote. He then appealed to the jurors to give MacDonald the peace he had sought for almost a decade. In his rebuttal argument, James Blackburn referenced Smith's earlier observation regarding the unbelievability of a successful doctor murdering his family, but contended the events of February 17, 1970 occurred because events overtook themselves too fast. Everything else, ladies and gentlemen, we say in that crime scene flowed from that moment. He then referenced once again to the physical evidence, stating that the evidence unequivocally illustrated the chain of events which occurred and which only pointed to MacDonald's guilt. Blackburn closed his rebuttal argument by stating that although the prosecution was convinced that MacDonald was guilty, they only wished he was not, given the final moments of the victims and who it was that was going to make them die, adding that the defendant would never have peace. In a final address to the jury, Judge Dupree informed the panel that they had 3 choices to choose from: to find MacDonald not guilty, to find him guilty of first-degree murder, or guilty of second-degree murder in each case. Conviction and incarceration. Shortly after 4 p.m. August 29, 1979, the jury, having deliberated for 6.5 hours, announced that they had reached their final verdict. MacDonald was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Kristen and 2 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of Colette and Kimberley. 4 jurors wept as they announced their verdicts, and MacDonald's mother rushed out of the courtroom. MacDonald himself displayed no emotion. Judge Dupree imposed a life sentence for each of the murders to be served consecutively. Bail was revoked, and MacDonald was temporarily transferred to a Butner County jail prior to his permanent transfer to the Federal Correctional Institution in Terminal Island, California. Immediately following the verdict, Alfred Kassab telephoned the family lawyer, Richard Kahn. Kassab thanked the lawyer for exhaustive efforts over the years, saying, "Hi, Dick, I just got what I wanted. 3 life sentences. Thanks for everything. We couldn't have done it without your help." The Kassabs also informed the press, quote, "This was something that had to be done. Now we can rest in peace," end quote. MacDonald appealed Dupree's bail revocation ruling, requesting that bail be granted pending the outcome of his appeal. This application was rejected on September 7th. A further appeal to be freed on bail was rejected by the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals November 20th. Post-conviction. Appeals. On July 29, 1980, a panel of the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed MacDonald's conviction, ruling via a 2-to-1 margin that the 9-year delay in bringing him to trial violated his 6th Amendment rights to a speedy trial. He was released on August 22nd, having posted $100,000 bail and subsequently returned to work as the director of emergency medicine at St. Mary's Medical Center in Long Beach, California. He would later announce his engagement to his fiancée, Randy D. Marquith, in March 82. What happened to he couldn't get married? 6 months later, December 18th, the 4th Court Circuit of Appeals voted 5-5 to hear the appeal en banc. As a majority did not vote to hear this appeal, the application was accordingly denied, upholding the previous ruling. This decision was appealed, and on May 26, 81, the U.S. Supreme Court accepted the case for consideration, hearing oral arguments on December 7th. On March 31st, 82, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that MacDonald's rights to a speedy trial had not been violated, stating that the time interval between the dismissal of the military charges and the indictment on civilian charges should not be considered in determining whether the delay in bringing MacDonald to trial violated his right to a speedy trial under the 6th Amendment. He was rearrested and returned to federal prison, and his original sentence of 3 consecutive life terms reinstated. The following year, MacDonald dismissed Siegel as his legal representative. Defense lawyers filed a new motion for MacDonald to be freed on bail pending appeal, but the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals refused. His remaining points of appeal, including his contention the evidence presented at trial did not justify the finding of his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, were heard on June 9th, 82, although his conviction was unanimously affirmed on August 18th. Shortly thereafter, MacDonald licenses to practice medicine in both North Carolina and California were revoked. MacDonald again appealed this decision, contending his conviction should be overturned due to suppressed exculpatory evidence. Dupree rejected these defense motions March 1st, 85. The Supreme Court upheld the lower court's decision October 6th, 86. A further defense motion that MacDonald should be granted a new murder trial on the grounds of prosecutorial misconduct was denied July 8th, 91. This ruling was appealed on the grounds of judicial bias on October 3rd, but was denied. A further appeal was argued before the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals February 92. This appeal listed newly discovered evidence, which MacDonald contended was suppressed at his trial and which he claimed corroborated his exculpatory account of the murders. This appeal contended that had Judge Dupree permitted this evidence, the jurors would have learned that all of the doctors hired by the defense who had worked for the Army or the government at Walter Reed Hospital had concluded that MacDonald was psychologically incapable of committing such acts of violence. The court ruled, well, to me, the Stokeley, those who heard Stokeley confess, because supposedly there's more than one individual, multiple individuals said that she had mentioned taking part in the murders. The fact that they weren't allowed to testify, to me, that's the most problematic here. That seems like a denial of his right to, because if they're credible, if they all, I mean, at the time polygraphs, but now brain fingerprint scans for all, because what would they all reveal? The court ruled against awarding a new trial June 2nd, stating Judge Dupree had acted correctly when he refused to allow the jury to view a transcript of the 1970 Article 32 hearing, and because this was not an insanity trial, he had acted properly in not allowing the jurors to hear any of the psychiatric testimony. This ruling also stated that Helena Stokeley's confessions of guilt pertaining to the murder were unreliable and conflicted with the established facts of the case, and accordingly, the judge's ruling against her being allowed to testify at MacDonald's 79 trial was valid. Well, how is that valid? Like, see, drug addicts are not reliable, that's true, but they also might commit murders in drug-fueled psychotic episodes. I mean, to be fair, you have to allow for all investigation and all available evidence to be presented. Also, the prosecution, if they can prove that MacDonald actually did know her somehow and intentionally placed her at the scene to muddy the waters, if they could do that, that would go a ways to discrediting that aspect, which, from all information here, that was not done. On September 2nd, 1997, I mean, I'm going through the decades here, the district court granted MacDonald's motion to file a supplemental affidavit with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. This affidavit contended that although several saran fibers found at the crime scene, which did not match any evidentiary item recovered, had most likely sourced from a doll and not a wig, these fibers were also used in the manufacture of human wigs prior to 1970, and thus added to the weight of previously amassed exculpatory evidence. Wait a second. So they did find fibers that may have been a wig, or may not have been, but fibers that did not originate in the home? That's curious. His motion for DNA testing upon these fibers was transferred from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals to the District Court. MacDonald's lawyers were also given the right to pursue DNA tests on limited hair and blood evidence on October 17th, 1997. This testing began in December 2000, with MacDonald's lawyers hoping the results would tie Stokeley and her then-boyfriend Gregory Mitchell to the crime scene. On March 10, 2006, the Armed Forces DNA ID Laboratory announced the results of the DNA testing revealed that the DNA of neither Stokeley nor Mitchell matched that upon any of the exhibits tested. But did they match MacDonald? Or did they or no? Furthermore, although a single hair found within Colette's left palm was also cited by MacDonald as belonging to one of the alleged intruders, this testing also revealed the hair to have come from his own body. But what about the other DNA testing that was tested against Stokeley or Mitchell? They didn't match. This hair was also a precise match with others recovered from the bedspread within the master bedroom upon the top sheet of Kristen's bed. Yeah, well, you would expect that. This hair was also a precise... Okay. A hair found in Colette's right palm was also determined to be her own. 3 hairs, one from the bedsheet, one found in Colette's body outline in the area of her legs, and a single hair measuring 1/5 of an inch found between Kristen's fingernail did not match the DNA profile of any MacDonald family member or known suspect. So that's curious. Okay. So there's a DNA profile that doesn't match MacDonald or any of the family members, and also does not match Stokeley or her boyfriend Mitchell. And of course, if there really were 4 intruders, we have no idea who the other 2 would have been. Or was it not Stokeley's boyfriend? Was it Stokeley and 3 other males? But even if it was her boyfriend, there's still 2 other males unaccounted for that they have no way to test the DNA against. Also, if this is some kind of frame job, obviously switching labels in the lab, that's how most crime scene corruption does occur. And no, I didn't forget, I still have the Stephen Avery podcast coming up on crime lab corruption, listing dozens and dozens and dozens of cases where this exact thing was done. Okay, September 2012, the district court conducted a formal evidentiary hearing regarding DNA evidence and statements relating to key witnesses who offered testimony indicating MacDonald's innocence. On July 24, 2014, the district court rejected these claims in their entirety and reaffirmed MacDonald's conviction on all counts. Reportedly, MacDonald was disappointed but not surprised with this ruling. He presented a motion to alter or amend this judgment to the district court, although this was denied November 2014. He then appealed the denial of this motion to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. On December 21st, 2018, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit affirmed the district court's ruling. In April 2021, MacDonald was denied a request for compassionate release upon the grounds of his ailing health, with Judge Terrence Boyle citing the compassionate release law applies only to individuals whose crime occurred on or after November 1st, 1987. That's a weird, arbitrary distinction. A further appeal against this ruling was dismissed by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit on September 16, 2021. Later confession of Helena Stokeley. Shortly after MacDonald's initial release from prison in August 1980, his supporters hired a retired FBI special agent and PI named Ted Gunderson to assist in overturning his conviction. And of course, we've gone over the one and only Ted Gunderson many, many times in many cases, most notably the Johnny Gosch series. Gunderson contacted Helena Stokeley, who on occasion confessed that she and 5 members of what she described as a drug cult had developed a deep grudge against MacDonald, as he had refused to treat heroin and opium addicted patients. Accordingly, she and other members of this group had plotted revenge against MacDonald, intending specifically to murder his family but leave him alive. Wow. Are we firmly in Mindshock territory or not at this point? According to Stokeley, she had telephoned the MacDonald residence late in the evening of February 16th to determine all members of the family were present in the house. Colette had answered and stated a babysitter would be there in the early evening, but that after she had left, all the family would be present and alone. The group had then dropped mescaline before driving to the MacDonald residence. She and 4 others. So did this not include her boyfriend here? It doesn't say that this included her boyfriend. She and 4 others had entered the house and confronted MacDonald, intending on him signing a Dexedrine prescription, although the situation quickly deteriorated, with MacDonald attempting to fight his attackers before quickly lapsing into unconsciousness. Stokeley alleged she then ran into the master bedroom to find "death to all pigs" or something like that scrawled on the headboard, and 2 of her friends bludgeoning Colette on the bed as her child lay asleep next to her. Stokeley was adamant she had worn a beige floppy hat on the evening in question. Stokeley had submitted a polygraph test in April 1971, with the military examiner stating, quote, "It is concluded that Miss Stokeley is convinced in her mind that she knows the identity of those person or persons who killed Colette, Kimberley, and Kristen MacDonald. It is further concluded that Miss Stokeley is convinced in her mind that she was physically present when the 3 members of the MacDonald family were killed. No abnormal physiological responses were noted in the polygraph tracings. However, due to Miss Stokeley's admitted confused state of mind and her excessive drug use during and immediately following the homicides in question, a conclusion cannot be reached as to whether she in fact knows who perpetrated the homicides or whether she was present at the scene of the murders. End quote. What's curious, though, because even if she's hallucinating, how many other murders have a drug addict local to the area also spotted by a delivery man? I mean, this is insane. Or the ambulance driver, delivery man, whoever that was. That's insane because she was placed near the scene by other parties, not just herself in her drug-induced state. Unless people are alleging MacDonald paid her off, or paid that guy off to say that. Now, what's curious here, so she doesn't name her boyfriend of one of these individuals. That's curious. That is curious. Unless it was the boyfriend, but she just didn't include him in this particular confession. Yeah, this is weird. And if Gunderson or these other individuals were attempting not to find the truth, but simply to get MacDonald off the hook for whatever reason, wouldn't they make up the story, or at least if they're lying, wouldn't they say that Stokeley only had 3 others with her instead of 4 to match MacDonald's account perfectly? Because this doesn't match MacDonald's account. There's an extra individual here. So if they're simply paid off by MacDonald or the MacDonald camp to try to prove that he's innocent, would they have these inconsistencies? Whereas if they're just trying to find the truth, that seems like that's more natural to be inconsistencies that way. April 16th, 2007, MacDonald's attorneys filed an affidavit on behalf of Stokeley's mother, Helena Teresa Stokeley, who stated that her daughter had twice confessed to her that she was present in the MacDonald house on the evening of the murders and that her daughter was afraid of the prosecutors. So not just all these other individuals, but her own mother. I mean, this is insane. I mean, this is truly one of the most mind-shocking cases ever. MacDonald requested to expand his then outstanding appeal to include this affidavit alongside all the evidence amassed at trial, the developments which he claimed had been subsequently discovered, including the 2006 results of the DNA testing. Yeah, the 2000 testing is curious because it does not include Stokeley or her boyfriend, but it also does not include any MacDonald family member. And the statements of individuals to whom Stokeley had made these confessions. This appeal also alleged that the trial statements of prosecutor James Blackburn should be considered unreliable as he had been convicted of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement and subsequently disbarred in 1993. Wow. That's insane. Wow. So the prosecutor who had been convicted of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and disbarred. So again, that doesn't mean that in the MacDonald trial, he was acting illegally, but that definitely throws into question his own credibility here. As he stated, was it him that stated that people lie and evidence doesn't? So if he was lying about the evidence, what does that mean? MacDonald's motions regarding the DNA results and the affidavit of Stokeley's mother were denied. The denial of these 2 motions were based on jurisdictional issues, specifically that MacDonald had not obtained the required pre-filing authorization from the circuit court for these motions to the district court. Nevertheless, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals granted MacDonald's motion for a successive habeas petition and remanded the matter back to the district court Eastern Division. The Britt affidavit. On January 12, 2006, MacDonald was granted leave to file a further appeal based upon a November 2005 affidavit of a retired Deputy United States Marshal Jim Britt, who had served in this role during the trial. Britt stated that he had overheard Helena Stokeley admit to prosecutor James Blackburn she had actually been present at the MacDonald house at the time of the murders and that Blackburn had threatened her with prosecution if she testified as a defense witness admitting this claim. Stokeley had earlier met with a defense counsel prior to this alleged meeting with Blackburn and informed them she had no memory of her whereabouts on the night in question. Wow. I mean, this is just getting worse and worse for the prosecution. I mean, clearly this is a wrongful conviction, even if he's guilty, because, I mean, this is just insane, because this matches one of the descriptions he gave, and she admitted this allegedly herself to her own mother, to a bunch of other individuals, and if we are to believe this U.S. Marshal that she also admitted this to James Blackburn, who had later been disbarred. Okay. I mean, this is quite a mountain of evidence. I mean, this is insanity here. This is insane. In November 2008, Judge James Carroll Fox denied this appeal. This denial was based on the merits of the claim, specifically that as Stokeley had made many contradictory statements regarding her participation or lack thereof in the murders, her claims were unreliable. Well, again, wouldn't you expect a drug addict tripping to be unreliable? That doesn't mean that she wasn't there or wasn't involved. In addition, MacDonald's claim that Stokeley had been expected to testify in a manner favorable to him at trial until she had been threatened by Blackburn is contradicted by the official trial records. Well, what about the U.S. Marshal? Subsequent to this November 2008 decision, a government motion to modify the decision to negate Britt's claims was denied. Included within the motion was jail documentation establishing that Stokeley was originally confined to the jail in Pickens, South Carolina, not Greenville, South Carolina, as Britt had claimed. Also included were custody commitment and release forms indicating that although Britt and fellow Deputy United States Marshal Geraldine Holden had escorted Stokeley into the Raleigh courthouse on August 1779, agents other than Britt and Holden had actually transported Stokeley to the 79 trial. MacDonald appealed the district court's denial of his claim to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. In 2011, the Court of Appeals reversed the decision, remanding MacDonald's claims back to the district court for further consideration. I mean, this is like a crazy game of ping pong here. I mean, it's just insanity. But Britt, again, why not subject Britt to a brain fingerprint scan? Because why would he lie about this with Stokeley? Maybe he was confused on certain details. I mean, sure. But clearly it's verified that he did escort Stokeley at some time. So he was present with her and could have overheard something. So, yeah, I mean, this is weird. MacDonald faced several legal obstacles in his efforts to incorporate a motion relating to the earlier results of DNA testing of hair and fiber evidence recovered from 544 Castle Drive into his motion regarding the claims made in Britt's affidavit, with the court stating he must obtain a pre-authorization for what should be a separate motion filed in relation to the results of the DNA testing. On April 19th, 2011, and it's just crazy how this is all still going on from this 1970 case, the United States Court of Appeals granted a pre-filing authorization relating to the DNA claims, reversing the decision of the district court and remanding his appeals for further proceedings. An evidentiary hearing related to the claims within the Britt affidavit, the hair and fiber evidence, and further testimony pertaining to Stokeley's verbal confessions was held in September 2012. However, in July 2014, Judge Fox ruled against MacDonald's appeal, upholding his convictions. Fatal vision. In June 1979, MacDonald invited author Joe McGinnis to write a book about his case. Initially unsure of MacDonald's guilt or innocence, McGinnis agreed to his request and was given full access to MacDonald and his defense team during the upcoming trial. The book McGinnis authored relating to the murders, Fatal Vision, portrays MacDonald as a narcissistic sociopath who was guilty of murdering his family and who believed in his ongoing capabilities to deceive both legal personnel and personal acquaintances. McGinnis quotes a 1979 report compiled by a psychologist named Hirsch Lazar Silverman, who stated MacDonald handled his conflicts by denying they even exist, adding that MacDonald lacked any sense of guilt and had been capable of committing asocial acts with impunity and had been incapable of forming emotionally close relationships with females of any age. Silvermore further states MacDonald had avoided and resented his commitments as a husband and father, and that given his ongoing denial of truth, he would continually seek both attention and approval. Fatal Vision also alleges a possible motive for the killings. As MacDonald was regularly taking the amphetamine Escatrol in an effort to lose weight via weight control program for his Green Beret unit, McGinnis suggests MacDonald may have murdered his family in a spur-of-the-moment fit of psychotic rage as a result of his frequent consumption of the amphetamines. Furthermore, the book emphasizes the fact that MacDonald worked extremely long hours in several medical employment roles in 69 and 70, and his extensive social and family commitments resulted in his suffering from an increased lack of sleep. Reportedly, MacDonald had expected McGinnis's book to profess his innocence and ongoing miscarriage of justice to which he had been subjected. In 1987, he sued McGinnis for fraud, claiming the author had agreed to hear his innermost thoughts in order to write a positive account of his ongoing fight for justice for himself and his family, but had actually falsely claimed to believe his claims of innocence after he had already reached a conclusion of his guilt in order that he, MacDonald, continue cooperating with him on the project. This lawsuit resulted in a mistrial on August 21st, 1987. The two later settled out of court for $325,000, although the Kassabs subsequently filed their own countersuit against MacDonald, citing an inheritance clause resulting in MacDonald receiving only $50,000. Okay, wow, okay. What to make of all that? Is it possible MacDonald was some kind of psychotic, but that he was also innocent? Because again, I think this case, it all hinges on Stokeley, because we have many cases where crazy drug addicts confess to crimes they didn't commit. But how many of those cases was someone matching that drug addict's description placed in the home as a guilty party by a person proven to have been in the home during the attack? I mean, this is just insane. I mean, this is definitely one of the most mind-shocking cases I've ever looked at. Wow, I mean, this is just really, really insane. Aftermath. Colette, Kimberley, and Kristen MacDonald were laid to rest side by side in Washington Memorial Park, Suffolk County, Long Island, February 23rd, 1970. Each grave was initially inscribed with the surname of MacDonald, although the gravestones were later changed to Colette's maiden name of Stevenson. MacDonald is currently serving his life sentence at a federal prison in Cumberland, Maryland, and continues to maintain his innocence. Several individuals believe MacDonald's claims of innocence, and he remains determined to clear his name. In 2017, MacDonald stated, quote, "I am not going to get out saying a falsehood to the Parole Commission in order for them to give me a break. If it takes me saying I killed my family to the Parole Commission to get out of here and go home, I'm never going home," end quote. Yeah, that is curious, because Stephen Avery also had the same position, because he wouldn't do that either. He would sit in prison and this was during the first frame up, the 85 frame up, were the same individuals that framed him in 2005. Even if he's guilty, they think he's innocent and they framed him. These same individuals framed him for the Penny Berenson assault in 85, and he didn't take any opportunity to get out because he was innocent, and he's not gonna get out by saying he's guilty. So again, is that principled or is that mental? I mean, I don't know. So MacDonald's lawyers have repeatedly used the Freedom of Information Act to locate any evidence not presented by either counsel at his 79 trial, citing suppression of evidence as justification for a retrial. All efforts have proved unsuccessful, as successive courts have ruled that these uncovered and stipulated items do not establish any proof of innocence, and thus would not have influenced the verdict of the jury. Well, they clearly would, if the DNA sample that doesn't match anybody in the house. I mean, that's insane. Not to mention all of the stuff around Stokeley. I mean, it's curious. I mean, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt when you have an individual like Stokeley and all of these alleged confessions, including a U.S. Marshal. I mean, that's not a fellow druggie. That's a U.S. Marshal. MacDonald claims that unidentified fingerprint and fiber evidence uncovered inside his home has never been matched to any known individual to have been in the premises prior to or after the murders, and that these prints are evidence of his claim of home intruders. Further evidence he contends has been withheld include two unidentified 22-inch long synthetic hairs found in a hairbrush, but which were not made available to his defense at trial, and a minute spot of blood, either type O or type B origin, either his blood or the blood of his daughter Kristen, that was uncovered in the hallway. His supporters also point to an unsourced black woolen fibers found upon Colette MacDonald's mouth and shoulder as evidence of intruders, which they contend were also deliberately withheld by the government from the defense from presenting as evidence supporting MacDonald's contention. In August 2002, MacDonald married a former children's drama school owner-operator named Catherine Courage. So this was not the other woman he was engaged to. The two had first met in Baltimore decades previously, but became reacquainted in 1997 after Courage wrote MacDonald a letter offering to assist with his legal case. Their friendship gradually became romantic, and their marriage occurred when MacDonald was incarcerated at a federal prison in California, IA. MacDonald was later transferred to the Federal Correction Institution at Cumberland, Maryland, which is closer to his new legal state of residence as well as to his wife. MacDonald became eligible for parole in 1991, but he did not apply for parole at that time. At the urging of MacDonald's second wife and his attorneys, MacDonald applied for a May 2005 parole hearing. His parole request was immediately denied. His next potential parole hearing was in May 2020, although it is unknown whether he applied for parole on this date. Gregory Mitchell, whom Helena Stokeley accused of murdering Colette MacDonald, died of cirrhosis of the liver on June 2nd, 1982 at the age of 31. Like Stokeley, Mitchell is known to have been a heavy narcotics user. Prior to his death, Mitchell allegedly confessed to multiple people of his involvement in murders. Okay, wow. Wow, so not just Stokeley, but her boyfriend also? What? Her boyfriend, or another individual that she was associated with here, Mitchell, he also confessed. So you have two individuals confessing to the murders. So it says he did pass a polygraph test in 1971, and the CID had cleared him of any involvement. So Stokeley passed saying that she was involved. Wait, so did Mitchell deny it in the polygraph, confess to other people, but denied in the polygraph, passed the polygraph? How high was he during the polygraph, and is that why he passed it? Helena Stokeley died at the age of 30 in January 1983. Her body was found inside her Seneca, South Carolina apartment, with her death estimated to have occurred 5 days before her body was discovered January 14th. Her autopsy indicated she died of acute pneumonia and cirrhosis. In the years prior to her death, Stokeley had undergone several years of treatment for drug addiction and psychiatric care. On December 17th, 1995, Judge Franklin Dupree died at the age of 82 following a short illness. Bernard Siegel, MacDonald's lead defense attorney, died in California in 2011. James Blackburn, a lead prosecutor in the 79 trial, later admitted that between 1990 and 91 he had forged several court documents unrelated to the MacDonald case and illegally wired money from his firm's bank account. In 93, Blackburn pled guilty to fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and obstruction of justice. He was disbarred and served 3.5 months in jail. Colette MacDonald's mother and stepfather, Mildred and Alfred Kassab, both died in 1994. She on January 19th, he on October 24th. Alfred Kassab had initially believed MacDonald's testimony and been a staunch and vocal supporter of his son-in-law, but he drastically changed his opinion and became one of MacDonald's fiercest adversaries. Initially, Mildred had welcomed the 1971 diagnosis of breast cancer, writing in her diary the cancer would help her in her desire to just die following the murders of her daughter and grandchildren. However, her husband's steadfast determination to see MacDonald brought to justice compelled her to assist him in his quest for justice, and she consented to submit to radiation therapy. In 1984, Kassab reflected on the impact the events made on his marriage to Colette's mother, stating, quote, "Most people who go through traumatic things like this, nowhere near as lengthy, almost always end up in divorce, but with us, it's drawn us closer," end quote. With his own health in decline in 1989, Kassab recorded a message on a tape recorder, stating he wished the recording to be played at any future parole hearings. In this recorded message, Kassab stated, quote, "I want to be sure he serves out his sentence the way it should be served out. I don't want him walking the streets," end quote. Yeah, what a perplexing case. I mean, Stokeley here, her boyfriend, these are definitely key figures, as well as Britt, the U.S. Marshal. I mean, this seems to be a wrongful conviction, even if he's guilty. I mean, it's weird. An interesting post here from Miss Night Terrors on the True Crime subreddit. You would think someone intelligent enough to attend Princeton and Northwestern Medical School could have done better than that. Did he really think anyone would believe him? This is in reference to the girl with the floppy hat. And also staging the scene. I mean, this guy's clearly very intelligent, so if he's guilty, you really would think he would have done a better job. Some more posts on this Reddit here. Senator Bink said Freddie Kassab eventually ended up suspecting Colette had walked in on MacDonald molesting Kim. Okay, so this theory actually, not that it's true, but it seems slightly more plausible because this could cause this kind of reaction. Response here by Snoo Cheesecakes. I had not heard that, OMG. That would explain his vehement denial that Kim was the one in his bed, probably would explain her bedwetting, and also the epic battle. That's gross and terrifying. I know he told people and said he told her he was leaving to go to Russia for a month with the boxing team, and perhaps she talked back to him about that, but it doesn't seem like she'd be furious as much as worried and upset about him being gone when she was pregnant with 2 little kids. The child molestation accusation would certainly do the trick, however. MacDonald needed to be seen as the best student, best athlete, best man, and best soldier, and big deal doctor, etc. He had a self-esteem issue with a big need to overcompensate around his masculinity, according to the psychiatrist who tested him. Being accused of wanting to sleep with his 6-year-old certainly might set him off. I find it so weird that his upstairs neighbor hears Colette angrily confronting him earlier, but did not hear the murders, as brutal as those were. So the neighbor's directly upstairs? Does anybody find this insane? Marquette Beach responded, I was stationed on Fort Bragg, and a friend of mine lived in the same housing area. It was the same house type. It really is the key. It was not a brutal murder, not a group of intruders and fighting. That would have been heard. It was him going person to person, killing them quickly. The military was pretty lax on child molestation at that time, though him being a doctor, that might have killed his career. Response by Snoo Cheesecakes. As a Green Beret, I don't know if that means they're trained to kill in hand-to-hand combat or if he was. I know he had jump training, but there had to be a time between him punching her in the face and him going to get the club and knocking her out with it when she'd be screaming. She had 2 broken arms from being hit hard enough with the club to break bones. I wonder if he used his medical knowledge to cut her trachea so she couldn't yell or anything. That is truly sick, but could possibly explain something there. Marquette Beach responded, he was not long tabbed. Special Forces units are airborne units, so you only have to be airborne qualified. The Green Beret was the unit headgear at the time, so anyone assigned to a Special Forces unit wore it. Just like if you wanted an airborne unit, even if you were not jump qualified, you would wear the unit headgear. Maroon Beret. They have changed this with Special Forces units. The only ones who wear the Green Beret are long tabbed. Otherwise, you wear a maroon beret. There are many reasons she may not have screamed or maybe tried and could not. The time of the attack, she was in deep sleep, and him waking her up, she probably was not aware what was going on right away. Maybe physical violence was unusual and she probably didn't scream because of the kids and didn't want the neighbors to hear. Maybe he knocked the wind out of her in the first hit and she hit the bed or floor. The one point on this is that if she woke up to find strangers, she would have screamed 100%. No scream does not 100% point to MacDonald, but it does kill most of his story, because this group of chanting hippies would have woken her before they got to her room. Not necessarily, because according to her statements, if she's engaged with MacDonald herself, either trying to get drugs or whatever, and the people that she came with are already engaged in these murders, if they put their hand over her mouth and started stabbing her immediately, and the other kids, that could explain that as well. So they're surrounded by people in the other apartment. So if this is some kind of a setup, were the neighbors threatened? Even if he's innocent, is it possible he had some friends that threatened him, that, I don't know, threatened the neighbors into not saying anything, innocent or guilty? Even if he's guilty, he could have done that. Or if he's innocent, if the fix was in... this kind of goes back to the JonBenet Ramsey case as well. If the police were instructed to intentionally botch the collection of evidence and the case for whatever reason, is that also what happened here, regardless of who's innocent or guilty? Another interesting point that Snow Cheesecakes pointed out No matter what, stabbing his wife through his pajama top was really strange. Ironic that a guy so obsessed with his masculinity would attack a sleeping pregnant woman and 2 very young children. Either that or stoned hippies did and he didn't fight back worth expletive. Not quite the macho image he wished to project. I mean, that's also true. If he wants to be viewed as that macho, would he give the story about such a... Well, then again, if there's that many perpetrators, maybe he thought that would, him going down quick... Yeah, I mean, it's tough no matter how you look at it. Then again, if he had just woken up, he wouldn't have known exactly what was going on as he was being attacked with a bunch of guys with weapons. I mean, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's also stated on a few different subreddits that Colette's stepfather actually paid for a reenactment of the murder per MacDonald's story, and it was impossible. I mean, without knowing exactly what happened, I mean, I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, all the neighbors, I mean, yeah, everything's a problem here. So what happened? Did the delivery guy who said he saw Stokeley, was he just lying about that for attention? Or did he not know who she was in? Did he not know that MacDonald described her at the crime scene? At the time of that report? That would be curious to know as well. Because they did say they were looking for these individuals, and he came forward. I don't know. That's tough. But at which point did he come forward? Yeah, we need a timeline on that. If he is on all those diet pill amphetamines, that could mess with his mind. So his recollection of events could be blurry. Again, regardless of innocent or guilty, but even if he's innocent, just that heavy use, lack of sleep, stress, etc. Are we saying he should be able to perfectly recall everything and explain every single piece of evidence, regardless of what happened? I mean, yeah, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. A post here on Reddit by LandMany4084. What is certain is that he did not get a fair trial. The government jumped through so many hoops and went against protocol to try him. One of the federal prosecutors transferred out of the military and specifically requested he be placed in the Justice Department as he pursued the case. That's insane. Furthermore, the prosecutor in the Article 32 hearing, one of them, was a former son-in-law of Judge Dupree. Wow. That alone should have disqualified him as a judge. He denied every single one of the defense team's legal motions. All of them. They also buried the lab notes that laid out candle wax in each of the locations MacDonald claimed. Wax that couldn't be traced to any candle in the house. Wow. Wow, this is insane. So these druggies, did they have candles and this was some kind of satanic ceremony as well? There are far too many questions for me to ever be certain of that. He also hired a terrible trial lawyer for the North Carolina case. Siegel's attitude was that his client would be handedly acquitted, so why waste time pursuing their own laboratory testing? That's messed up. The lab notes might have changed his mind on that front. MacDonald may have been rightly convicted, but he was not justly tried. That's a good way of putting it. So yeah, we have Stokeley, all those confessions, the U.S. Marshal testimony, the unidentified DNA sample, and now also missing lab notes that supposedly lay out the candle wax locations in the locations MacDonald claimed. That is mind-shocking, I have to say. That's mind-shocking. I also wonder if the stepfather, if certain military officials that wanted MacDonald, wanted to do MacDonald in no matter what, did they tell him something that wasn't true? Or some kind of falsified report or whatever to lead it? Because he initially thought MacDonald was innocent, and then he turned based on numerous pieces of info, including MacDonald's own behavior, which of course, again, if he has some psychotic issues as well, even if he's innocent. If he was fed false info and based, or if that tainted his view in some way, what does that mean? Because now we have all this funny business with the judge and the prosecutor and all of this and the suppression of evidence and so-called misplaced lab notes. I mean, that's crazy. Okay, wow. We're going into Mindshock land even further. Altruistic Logic 69 posted this. I believe both Jeff MacDonald and Helena Stokeley are guilty. I have a feeling they worked together. I don't get why no investigation ever considers that both can be part of the murders. I believe she was there and Jeff committed the murders. The whole time her confession had been that she's been involved in a murder, which means she took a part in it, which means someone else also took a part in it. Okay, all right, wow. We are firmly in Mindshock land. This is Mindshock. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. The motto here, of course, is the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Does that actually explain a lot of this? Is it possible MacDonald was involved in some kind of illegal drug peddling of various drugs and Helena Stokeley was one of the customers, possibly also these other guys, and something went wrong? Now, he could never admit that. She would be too scared to admit that for whatever reason, although who knows what she did or didn't admit on other occasions, and who knows what's been held back. I mean, is that why they didn't want to let her testify or let originally in the military investigation, or even to let any of the people who heard her confessions or her mother testify or provide evidence, because somehow they knew that he was also guilty and they didn't want to muddy the waters? Now, regardless of that, if they both participated in to a certain extent, does that explain all the inconsistency? And if she was there and her friends were there during those murders, let's say he's innocent, but he's guilty of providing them with drugs. Let's say there's a fight or dispute that breaks out, the collateral damage are the children, and these drug-induced psychotics stab them a bunch of times in this. I mean, it is hard to believe that he would do it with that level of violence, but who knows, whatever. Whether he did or he didn't, let's just say theory A. Let's examine two different theories where they're all there, and MacDonald is involved to a certain extent. If he's involved in peddling drugs, which again, he would probably never admit. So in this scenario where he's innocent of the violence against his family, but he's guilty of peddling drugs, so these people were in the house. Now, would they attempt to frame him so that way they only used what was in the house? Mostly. Again, they're drug addicts. They left candle wax. There's some DNA samples, possibly. But for the most part, they do their best to make it seem like he acted alone and then run away. That's why they just dump the weapons right outside the back door, because that makes him look more guilty. Right? Or in theory B, he is somehow also involved. Maybe he gets into a fight with Colette while they're there. Or maybe they're disgruntled druggie customers or whatever, and they show up at the house. And Colette becomes aware of his drug peddling at that moment, and he's getting into a verbal fight with her while the other guys are there. Maybe he even does strike her but doesn't kill her, and then all-out mayhem ensues after that. But this does seem more plausible than him acting alone if he did it, because it's just so difficult to explain away Stokeley. I just can't do it. I mean, how much of a coincidence theorist Dunning-Kruger goof do you have to be to just pretend that Stokeley's completely unrelated? You also have to throw away this U.S. Marshal putting his reputation on the line. You have to throw away, okay, the delivery guy, maybe he doesn't have as much of a reputation as a U.S. Marshal, but why would he come forward with false info that he spotted her in the area? And then you also have the alleged confessions of her boyfriend or associate as well. So it really seems like both of them being involved to some extent. This seems to be the most plausible theory thus far based on all the information we have available here. I really can't shake that U.S. Marshal. We also have Ted Gunderson. I mean, with his claims on what Stokeley had stated, it really seems like Stokeley must have some level of involvement. So possibly they're both guilty. Who knows? But if he's guilty of something illegal revolving around drugs, that would explain how he knows Stokeley and possibly her associates. All right, here we have some more mind-shocking insider info from a poster named Kelgarth. My uncle was assigned to Fort Bragg at the time of the murders and was involved in the Article 32 investigation. People said Helena Stokeley literally terrorized the base. For a while, she babysat for parents, and afterwards they would find items missing from their homes. She was caught peeping in windows at all times of night and broke into several houses. Not difficult on a military installation where people are lax about locking doors. It got to the point parents were afraid to allow their kids outside in the evening because Stokeley was caught giving them drugs and trying to scare them. She would even climb trees and cackle like a witch. She was also totally obsessed with the Manson murders, and that was all she talked about. People found graffiti about killing pigs, helter-skelter, etc. on their cars. Once she was caught putting something in the food at a wives' luncheon, but because she was the daughter of a high-ranking officer, the contaminated food was simply thrown out, and the MPs weren't even notified. Stokely and her weird friends considered MacDonald a narc because he reported or was accused of reporting military dependents using illicit drugs to the local police, and a lot of people on the base at the time of the murders were convinced this was the reason he and his family were targeted. Okay, we are firmly in smoking gun territory, way in Mindshock land, and I believe that if this is true, again, I am not claiming anything is true or untrue, if it can be determined that this information from Calgarth is actually legitimate, I have to lean towards innocence here. Because if MacDonald really is straight edge, a straight shooter, and he actually is viewed as a narc, and he actually reported the use of illicit drugs to local police. Also, this is 1970. We have to keep that in mind. So this military guy, if he really is a straight shooter, and he did report this, so can we write off that Stokeley, being the daughter of a high-ranking officer? I mean, that almost connects the dots here. So if all of these other people have testimony that she's literally terrorizing the base, it's not surprising that she would be in the area. If she actually did break into all these other homes, is there any evidence that she babysat for the MacDonalds or no? But even if she didn't, it seems like if MacDonald really did have this reputation as a narc, they were specifically targeted, and there really is all this other graffiti about pigs. I mean, what does that mean? This is insane. If this information is legitimate, I mean, yeah, it seems like MacDonald might have some kind of psych issue. I mean, who wouldn't after this? And that's why he's so weird after this. Calgarth also posted this. Of course, I've always found it strange that those closest to the situation, i.e., those who knew MacDonald and Helena Stokeley, were convinced she was involved and he was innocent. And those who didn't know anyone involved thought him guilty. You know what's also crazy? Doug Nut Muffin posted this. Helena Stokeley said heroin was being flown into the U.S. inside the body cavities of dead soldiers. A DEA veteran named Michael Levine confirmed this in an essay he wrote called The Drug Wars Shills. It's in the book Into the Buzzsaw. He doesn't go into much details, but cites a court case as reference, U.S. versus Herman Jackson, etc. So that is kind of, so a lot of drug users are so-called crazy people. A lot of their so-called conspiracy theories end up being true. So what kind of information was Helena Stokeley privy to? If she really is the daughter of a high-ranking officer, and MacDonald got caught in the middle here. This kind of does explain everything. This kind of explains everything. Another post from Calgarth. I think it's fairly common knowledge that drugs are being transported to the U.S. in the bodies of fallen service members, and Helena Stokeley hung around with the lowest of the low. So I'm not surprised she knew about it. My uncle knew an army captain who had a kid around 10 years old who got drugs from Helena Stokeley and became so ill he had to be taken to the hospital and have his stomach pumped. Of course, nothing was done about it, and the captain was suddenly transferred to another base, even though he had been at Fort Bragg less than a year. According to a nurse, it was this incident that prompted MacDonald to start providing names of military dependents, i.e. teenagers, using illicit drugs to the local police. Apparently, it got to the point that a lot of teens didn't want to go to the base clinic or hospital when they were ill because they were afraid MacDonald would be on duty. Of course, you can't believe every rumor you hear on military installations. I know because I was in the Navy, but I've always believed MacDonald probably was turning in drug users on the base, and people on drugs like Stokeley and her motley crew will do just about anything to protect their supply and stay out of jail. Furthermore, if some of the neighbors had dependents who either did drugs and they were afraid MacDonald would report on them, or MacDonald already reported on them, did they in fact see Stokeley and her cohorts? Did they in fact hear the crime being committed? But they didn't want to say anything against Stokeley. They wanted MacDonald to go down for it, or were they neutral and simply afraid? Were they neutral and simply afraid of Stokeley's high-ranking father? So they didn't want to implicate her. This is starting to make more and more sense the more we go down these rabbit holes. Calgarth also posted this: there's always resentment among enlisted personnel and lower-ranking officers toward higher-ranking officers. And MacDonald was only a captain. Perhaps he had a bad experience with a patient who was using illicit drugs. Perhaps he was tired of seeing Stokeley and others like her wreaking havoc on the base and getting away with it just because Daddy was a colonel. Perhaps he had friends who were police officers, which he probably did because he was a doctor and would have had occasion to come into contact with local police. Perhaps he hated hippies, or maybe he just hated Helena Stokeley personally. Okay, here's the thing, though. If he is guilty, though, and is highly intelligent psychopath, if he knew Stokeley was terrorizing the base and obsessed with the Manson murders and leaving all this graffiti, did he stage the scene to make it look like her and her cohorts did this? To make it believable because of all this information? I mean, this is also very tough, though. This is all very, very tough. Calgarth also posted this: the crime scene was contaminated because military police officers first on the scene had never handled a murder case. There are very few serious crimes on military installations and tracked in and out of rooms, touching various objects, etc. The evidence against Jeff is questionable, and don't forget, he was cleared at the Article 32 hearing. It was 5 years before he was indicted by a civilian court, and another 4 years for a total of 9 years before he was tried, by which time many of those involved or who had information had relocated, died, or forgotten a lot of what they had known. So this, again, if Colette's stepfather was given false information by military personnel and that they used him as a pawn, I mean, that would be obviously very sad as well. I mean, heartbreaking on top of heartbreaking, obviously, for this case. Calgarth also posted this: the blood trail in the apartment is open to interpretation, and if he was awakened by Colette's screams like he said, her blood on his pajamas, the torn pajama pocket, etc. could have occurred while he was fighting off the intruders in the master bedroom. He was bashed over the head and at some point lost consciousness, and I know from experience that a significant blow to the head can obliterate memory or result in confusion. Additionally, Army doctors did not consider MacDonald's wounds, one of which punctured his lungs, superficial. MacDonald was a jackass, and once he got over the shock of what happened, he seemed to revel in the notoriety. He shouldn't have lied to Kassab about finding and killing one of the intruders, but by that point, I'm sure he just wanted to get his father-in-law off his back and get on with his life. But how do we know for certain that he lied about that, though? Because if who Stokeley hung around with was common knowledge, do we know for certain that he didn't do that? Other posters discussed that if he had a bad reaction to whatever drugs he was taking, diet pills, or if he also took drugs in addition to the diet pills, he could have had hallucinations that he believed were real. So if he had seen Stokeley earlier and knew who she was and that she terrorized the base, did he hallucinate her being there? But that doesn't explain why she would confess to it and all these other people either. But just going through all the theories here again, I mean, I don't want to be remiss and miss any of the theories. I mean, also, I keep going back, if that information is true about those lab reports mentioning the candle wax not matching any candles that were in the house, that's a tough one. A post by Jana Arden here. I am on the fence. I so wish they would have got more out of Helena Stokeley than they did. I also think there were a lot of things going on in that town and around the base at the time, especially the drug scene. I think MacDonald's arrogance, liking of the spotlight, has a lot of people believing he is guilty just based on the actions after his family was killed. I do think about that, but don't give it a great amount of weight in saying that he's guilty. But there are other things that point out that make me wonder a lot, especially his lack of injuries, and if the scene in the living room was staged or not. He was a doctor and he was an intelligent person, as told by many people. In my opinion, he was also a perfectionist person. He was a type A and strove to do his best to have the best. He was working his way up the ladder. He liked to excel. I wonder what wasn't lining up with his life at the time. Was the family situation getting out of his control? Those are the things that I wonder about. I mean, if he really is a perfectionist, why not stage the crime scene better if he was guilty? I mean, that is a problem. I mean, also, isn't it convenient? It seems awfully convenient that Stokeley's obsessed with the Manson murders and there's all this pig graffiti everywhere. You know, yeah, I mean, that seems awfully convenient, doesn't it? If MacDonald's going to go through the trouble of staging blood graffiti in the bedroom with Pig, wouldn't he make a little bit more of a mess in the living room? I mean, how do people rectify this? So what are the pieces of evidence that the guilters usually ignore? If the lab reports that were seemingly lost and not put into trial, but people that had seen them stated that there's candle wax. There's also a hair from a possible wig. And then there's also a piece of DNA that doesn't match anybody in the house. So those are three damning pieces of physical evidence that are just ignored. That's a problem. And then, of course, the relationship between the judge and the prosecutor, former son-in-law, that's a problem. The military individual who actually left the military and joined the Justice Department just to try MacDonald and make sure he got convicted, the denial of all these appeals and all this evidence, the U.S. Marshal putting his reputation on the line, and Ted Gunderson as well, regarding Stokeley. That's a lot of problems right there. That's enough to make me lean in the direction that he's possibly innocent. Now, if we combine his diet pill use, if he had a bad reaction, and he also is a smug, arrogant guy, that could explain the behavior. I never like to look too much at the behavior, just like in the Scott Peterson case. I mean, there's schmucky, arrogant philanderers out there. That doesn't mean they're murderers. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, just go and look. People behave like that all the time. That doesn't mean they're guilty of murder. So I would give that the least amount of weight. It's also hard to ignore that if Stokeley's father really is a high-ranking officer and there's all these antics, it's just so much to ignore, though. It's tough. It's really, really tough. And if Stokeley's boyfriend also confessed to all these other people, it's so hard to ignore all of this information. Also, other people comment there's some discrepancies on testimony. So one of the babysitters supposedly lived upstairs, and in her trial, she did not hear that she did not state that she heard raised voices, but in one of the books, she did state that. So that's kind of weird. Other information, even with his busy schedule, supposedly he was actually training with the boxing team at the time. And he was in physically good condition. And that MacDonald was even planning to accompany the boxing team overseas. So if he's doing all this boxing training, I mean, again, if it's three drugged up guys who don't feel pain with weapons, yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough. In the Wilderness of Error series, Helena Stokeley's friend admits that Helena borrowed her floppy hat on that specific night and borrowed her roommate's boots in episode 4. So, I mean, this podcast is getting a little long. There's definitely going to be an episode 2. I'm just going to leave a little tease here. We'll be going over a wilderness of error in the next episode, as well as some in-depth articles on the case featuring even more information and possibly another woman, not Helena Stokeley, who was seen in the area that possibly matched the clothing she was wearing, but not the face. So the last post I'm going to go over here by Chili. I did see one thing in Wilderness of Error that gave me pause about the Helena Stokeley theory. Stokeley claims to have been in the MacDonald house when the phone rang and laughed when the caller asked for Dr. MacDonald. There's also a person who said he made that call seeking medical advice, recalls a woman answering and laughing, then hanging up. The caller also says he remembers hearing a scuffle in the background and someone yelling at Stokeley to hang up the phone. If this is true, it's pretty strong and corroborated evidence of her presence in the house that night. Does anyone know whether this allegation is credible? Phone records would easily confirm whether a call was placed to the MacDonald residence at that time. And I don't know if that's ever been tracked down by anybody. I know there's a lot of shoddy phone evidence regarding in the 70s, but I mean, this is on a military base. Presumably, it would be able to be tracked down. So again, I will always default to the brain fingerprint scan just to glean more information from those still alive, because that's pretty important. But yeah, we'll be doing a follow-up episode. All the Mindshock listeners out there, feel free to leave your thoughts, theories, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, any possible new or undiscussed evidence. And we will attempt to, as always, take a logical look at this case as much as possible given the available information. Hope everybody found another edition of Mindshock True Crime interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.